Audio check. Sit down. Right. We're going to confuse you by our seating arrangements and by the presence of the chair. Good morning, everyone.
Morning. This is on. Good morning. As many of you know, I'm recused from the proceedings that will be addressed today, but I have asked the panel of commissioners assigned to these dockets for permission to jump in before the proceedings start in order to say a few words about a different topic altogether. It's my understanding that today might be the last day that Richard Sobolewski will be in this hearing room as a permanent employee of the state of Connecticut before his official retirement this spring. Rich, or Sobe as his friends call him, has dedicated over 4 decades of his life to this thing of ours, the utility regulation and rate-making world in Connecticut. Some people might not be aware that Sobe started his career at the Department of Public Utility Control as a member of the prosecutorial unit, the ancient predecessor to EOE, before moving to the Office of Consumer Counsel pretty soon afterwards, where he's been ever since and where he has led the technical and oftentimes legal staff as a supervisor there for many years. Sobe was actually in charge of the entire OCC when I first met him. He was acting consumer counsel prior to Claire Coleman's appointment when he hired me as a clueless staff attorney. Anyone who works in this building or comes to this building seeking rate adjustments or other vexatious issues knows who Sobe is and respects his deep institutional knowledge and supernatural recollection of decades worth of developments in Connecticut's rate-making paradigm. He was here through restructuring, securitizing stranded assets, the development of decoupling, the creation of all the line items in the electric RAMs, the development of the DIMP mechanism, the creation of the WICA program for water companies, and so on and so on. Sobe has seen ebbing and flowing tides of multiple iterations of performance-based rate-making, trackers, affordability crises, eras of settlements and non-settlements, and every flavor of political intrigue coming through this world. Mark Twain is credited with the saying, "There is no such thing as a new idea." And I think if you have Sobe's depth of experience in this space, that probably feels very true. Sobe is well known for his skill at communicating exactly how he feels. If he thinks your idea is stupid, he will make this quite clear to you and everyone around you. But it works both ways. He will pick up the phone to let you know you've done a great job. And one of his greatest superpowers is his capacity to listen to varying points of view and sometimes, although rarely, change his own perspective. And that's an increasingly rare and admirable trait these days. For more than 40 years, Sobe has been quietly and sometimes not so quietly shaping and improving ratepayer outcomes via decisions from this agency, the courts, and the legislature. I happen to know that ever since I first started there, OCC has been internally dreading the day when he hangs it up. And I'm sure they've been doing everything they can to extract every ounce of wisdom from him while he's still around. The rest of us, too, Pura and the companies alike, will be worse off without him and his depth of knowledge and insight. But nobody can say he hasn't earned the right to spend more time with his kids, go to concerts, bake more cookies, watch more basketball. You can't save the world every day forever. Thank you, Sobe, for everything you've done for all of us, and I hope everyone will join me in a round of applause. And I'll also invite the Consumer Counsel to the podium to offer any additional remarks.
Family members, with all colleagues. I will just say a few words on top of your remarks today. It is an incredibly significant transition that our office will be undergoing as Sobe embarks on the well-deserved retirement that he has been planning. But he cares so deeply about our mission and our office. I think that for a long time, he's put the state of Connecticut, the ratepayers, and our team before his personal interests for a long time. So we're truly grateful for his 40 years of service. It's special to be able to be before the commissioners today to acknowledge his contributions. Sobi has taught me personally so much about rate making, whether it's, weedy terms like regulatory lag or deadband or, walking through rate of return and ROE calculations. His technical skills are incredible. But it's not just those technical skills that are going to carry on through our office's legacy, and I hope my own. Sobi has really taught me that a true and effective ratepayer advocate always stands up for ratepayers. We do our job, and we always prioritize policy outcomes for ratepayers over politics. And he's really taught me that. We get criticized sometimes for aligning with the utilities and not being aggressive enough for ratepayers, and we get criticized for being too aggressive at times. But really, what's always driving our mission and what Sobi has taught me is that it's about the policy and the framework and the outcomes for consumers. And that's what drives all of us in the work that we do every day. The dedication that Sobi's shown is really incredible. He'll take calls, as Chair Wheel said, any time of day and night, even during March Madness. Though I try my best, I feel like every year we have a March Madness crisis that I'm on the phone with him saying, I know you're trying to take some time off, but here's a sticky issue I'm working through. So, I know we're so lucky Sobi is leaving the regulatory framework in a really strong position. We're hoping that he's gonna, Chair Wheel said, last day in the hearing room as a permanent staff employee, we're certainly trying our best to figure out, a TWR, some kind of consulting, or not consulting. Anyways, keeping him on because his expertise is so valuable to us. So I just want to say, hopefully this won't be the last time we get him in the hearing room, but if it is, I do want the record to reflect his invaluable contributions to our office, to the ratepayers of Connecticut, the hundreds of millions of dollars that he has saved ratepayers over the decades of his experience, but also the good policy that he's put forward, advancing clean water, clean, sustainable, affordable electricity, gas. He is really the foundation of our mission, and we will miss his regular presence in our office a lot. So thank you for the opportunity. And we look forward to a month of celebrating Sobi. So again, please get up one more round of applause.
Thank you. And now for something completely different, I'll pass the mic over to the presiding officer, Commissioner Cheeseman, and I will bounce. Hold on.
You're good. Good morning, and thank you, Consumer Council, and thank you, departing Chairman Wheel. And before we get underway officially, I want to add my thanks and congratulations. And in the 6 months that I've been here, hard to believe, I have been so struck by the hard work, the dedication, and the commitment of everyone who works in this building. And indeed, for the people who appear before us. I think, as we said, we're not always going to agree, but I have no doubt that as we go through our work, and I hope I speak for everyone, we do it in a respectful manner where we have a frank and meaningful exchange of views, but at the end of the day, we will reach a decision that will be respected by all. So, having done my party piece, Good morning again, everyone. Welcome back to docket number 251113, remand of the application of Southern Connecticut Gas Company to amend its rate schedule. We are here today to hear argument from the parties and interveners regarding the issues they want the commissioners to focus on in this proceeding. And I will add, upon the conclusion of this portion, we will address docket 251114. Now for some background. As you are likely aware, the Superior Court for the Judicial District of New Britain remanded the November 18, 2023 decision in docket number 231102, application of the Connecticut Natural Gas Corporation and the Southern Connecticut Gas Company to amend their rate schedule to the Public Utility Regulatory Authority for entirely new rate proceedings, and ordered the authority to consider the underlying rate applications as if newly filed. On April 11, 2026, the authority issued a procedural order and notice of opportunity to present argument, which invited all parties and interveners to submit a statement of the issues on which they would like the authority to focus in the remand proceeding and to present argument on all issues. The company, the Office of Consumer Counsel, Pura's Office of Education, Outreach and Enforcement, and the Office of the Attorney General each submitted a statement. And now I will now take appearances from any attorneys representing a party or intervener.
Good morning, Commissioners. Brendan Vaughn from Keegan Whirlin on behalf of Connecticut Natural Gas Corporation and the Southern Connecticut Gas Company. I do have an administrative matter. I can deal with that after appearances. If that,
I will take appearances and then we'll handle administrative
Thank you very much.
matters, Attorney Vaughn.
Good morning, Commissioners. Andrew Minikowski on behalf of the Office of Consumer Counsel. I'm joined by Consumer Counsel Claire Coleman, and if I need him, our Director of Technical Analysis, Rich Sobolewski. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Tom Lopez on behalf of the Office of Education, Outreach, and Enforcement, and I'm joined by my colleagues, Attorney Brittany Wyman and Attorney Jamie Spanhake. Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners. Caroline McCormick on behalf of the Office of the Attorney General.
Any further appearances? No, we'll handle administrative matters now, please.
Thank you, Presiding Officer Cheeseman. I just wanted to note for the record as an administrative matter, while I understand that this is oral argument and I will primarily be handling that, we do have several subject matter experts available from the company to the extent that the commission has specific questions about issues raised in the company's statement of issues or values or math that needs to be done. We have Mr. Jacob Hurwitz, Senior Director of Revenue Requirements. We have Ms. Andrea Van Luling, Avangrid's controller, and we have other subject matter experts available. I did just want to flag that we do have Mr. Bieber present on tax issues, Mr. David Bieber, though he does have a pressing conflict at 12 that will require him to leave. To the extent that there are specific questions on the tax issues that were raised in the company's statement of issues, I just wanted to flag that as a timing consideration. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Attorney Minikowski.
Thank you, Commissioner Cheeseman. I do have one administrative/legal matter, and I raise this now not because I'm eager for battle, but out of courtesy to Attorney Vaughn, so I don't have to interrupt his oral argument, which I would not appreciate, and I imagine he would not either. The OCC has reviewed the filing that the company put in, particularly the attached rate schedules and exhibits. We have noted in our review that those filings contain a substantial amount of evidence that is not currently in the record as adopted by Pura, and we would like to lodge a standing objection throughout the proceedings today, just on the record, to the inclusion of that material. Obviously, we can expound upon this in our brief that's due on the 15th, but just for the record, we would like to note that we do have a standing objection to the inclusion of new unvetted materials in this proceeding.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Do any other parties or interveners have administrative matters?
Not from the OU, thank you.
Attorney General? Attorney McCormick, I'm promoting you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I'd appreciate that too.
We would like to second the OCC's objection from our office. Thank you.
All right, and just quickly, I will note, and I will, before we address that issue of new evidence, the Attorney General's office did submit a request to be an intervener in this proceedings. The authority has not yet ruled on it, but do any parties object to them participating as an intervener at this point? No? All right, thank you. And the authority will issue a ruling with regard to that. With regard to OCC's objection, I am going to sustain that objection to new evidence. It was made clear in our notice of proceedings what particular items would be considered as we discuss this. Looking at the clarifying order, the pyramid conduct the ordered remand proceeding and compile a new record in any way that otherwise complies with applicable law and regulations. And we designated certain contents of the evidentiary record as those items which we would consider. So I am ruling that, and having consulted with the other commissioners, that we will not be considering new evidence in this case. And I would like the actually, would you like to respond to the objection, Attorney Vaughn?
Thank you for the opportunity to respond to the objection. I intended to address the issue of new evidence and the propriety of new evidence in due course during the oral argument. I can do so now. I believe that PURA has the discretion to consider new evidence as appropriate in setting rates for the future period. And I believe that it should do so in this case. I understand the OCC's objection, and I understand they've raised a standing objection and intend to brief that should they so desire. But I do believe that it is appropriate in these circumstances for PURA to consider certain aspects of additional evidence beyond the contents of what was in the notice. The company has limited any additional new materials to providing actual information on plant and service through March 2026 and providing an adjustment for it increases to wages that have actually been paid that account for a new union collective bargaining agreement and the actual experience of the companies in escalating their wages. There's also a request in attachments 1 and 2 to the company's proposed revenue requirements to recover the cost of the legal expenses incurred to appeal the underlying cases and to reset the cost of debt for each company. Now, those are just many of those are just mathematical issues. I understand that. But I believe that it's an opportunity. This is an opportunity to set the company's rates for the future period consistent with 1619E, which requires that the company's rates reflect its capital costs and its operating costs. And we've provided limited adjustments in this circumstance where it is appropriate to do so. I don't believe that the objection should be sustained here where we are dealing with a somewhat unique remand here. This is not a remand to discuss one aspect of a case where PURA, the court determined that PURA got one element wrong, or to reevaluate one area. It is remanded to set new rates compile a new record. And I think it's appropriate to compile that record based on the actual evidence of where the company stands as of today. So we've provided you with the most relevant information possible. I would also note that for capital costs, as I'll explain, there are two distinct elements of the capital request, right? There is elements, and we can provide additional information on this should you so desire, but there was elements in the rate that was in the rate year in the underlying request, which ran through December of 2025. And then we provided information on the new, on the period after December 25. So I do believe that in setting rates, PURA should evaluate this evidence. I believe it comports with 1619E, and I believe you have the discretion to do so. And I don't believe that you should rule on the objection or sustain the objection as of now. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Vaughn. Would any parties or interveners like to respond? Attorney Minkowski.
Thank you, Commissioner. I may as well, since we've moved on to this point. I just want to set the stage a bit. It's important to recognize that I agree with Attorney Vaughn. This is an unusual remand. Usually a court identifies one or two issues in a decision that may need to be revisited. It's unusual that the court says, go back and rewrite the whole decision. However, that's where we are. The Superior Court is well aware of the remedies that it has when it sends a decision back to an administrative agency. And this is reflected in General Statutes 4-183 that sets forth the court's review. And it's specific. Page 12 of the court's decision here, the court said that the appeal was being sustained pursuant to 4-183J. If the court had sent it back for new evidence, which does happen in administrative appeals where a court determines that the agency didn't consider evidence it should have, it would have remanded under 4-183H. However, the Superior Court did not in this case. It simply gave the case back to PURA to reformulate a new decision following the court's findings that the previous final decisions had been issued upon improper procedure. Just to expound a bit upon my colleague Attorney Vaughn's points about how PURA has the discretion to do this, I would argue it normally in the abstract in a rate case, yes, PURA has exceptional discretion. However, the activities we're conducting here today in these dockets are limited as a result of that remand order. This isn't an open and new rate case where everything's on the table. We're acting pursuant to a court order. And we're in this strange situation where the company has conceded that a large number of items that made up the original rate decisions, they're fine with. Those can stay the same. However, there's these select number of issues that I imagine we'll discuss at length today where the company would like updated information. I think that would be wildly inappropriate. One, it gets dangerously close to single issue rate making, where the authority will be altering one rate element in isolation, and that may have impacts on the other rate elements that aren't being revisited in this proceeding and may stay the same as the original final decisions, depending on the authority's actions. The other thing I would like to raise in regard to this is much of this new information that was submitted in the company's statement of the case, and I'll use the updated plan as a prime example. What is that? Was it prudently incurred? Is it used and useful? I mean, literally, what is it? Is it, an additional, I think it was $15 million for one of the companies of gold plating, or was it actual mains? I just don't know. The authority doesn't know. We have had no chance to vet that information. Now, in a normal rate case, there would have been the routine discovery that goes on. We would have had experts evaluate that evidence. They would have testified here in the hearing room, and we would have had a full opportunity to figure out what those investments consisted of and whether they should properly be in rates or not be in rates. Here, we've just essentially been given a bill and said, this is what we've accrued as the company in the time since those rate decisions, and it should be added to bring us up to speed. But that skips that whole integral part of the process where the authority and the OCC and the other parties look at the evidence and say, okay, yes, these expenses are properly recoverable from ratepayers, whereas these we think there's some problems with and they're not. So that raises just an enormous problem, not only from a ratepayer perspective, they should really only be paying for prudently incurred and used and useful investment, but also this authority's role as the regulator to watch over the company's expenses and the OCC's role as the consumer watchdog. If the authority were to take up the company's suggestion of including this new unvetted evidence and expense, it's not insubstantial. The net effective rate increases, including that material for CNG, would be $24.2 million above what's allowed in the previous decisions, and for SCG, $15.2 million above what is allowed in the previous decisions. So the authority is being asked essentially to take these old pieces of the rate case from 2 years ago and stitch them together with these new pieces into sort of a composite rate case, a Franken rate case, if you will. And I would submit that's guaranteed to create a monster. It's not going to make any sense. It might look good on paper, but once those rates go into effect, it's going to have unintended consequences in the other parts of the rate plan and the revenue requirements. So we would submit, it's not proper to submit this evidence at that time. I understand where the company's coming from. A substantial amount of time has passed since the original rate decision was issued, given how long the appellate litigation lasted. But if the company has accrued those costs to such an extent that it's necessary to have them, I would submit the remedy is right before them. They are free to file a new rate application at any time. Now, that isn't an enormous amount of work for everyone in this room, and I understand that. But rather than trying to tack these new expenses onto the court's order that the authority issue a new decision on the previous rate application, the proper way to proceed to make sure that everything is on the level and gets the full analysis it deserves would be for the company to file a rate application. So I would submit in conclusion that the authority should sustain my initial objection to the inclusion of that evidence at this time, given the reasons I've stated today. And unless the authority has any questions, I'm happy to rest.
Thank you, Attorney Minikowski.
Thank you.
Do any other,
Commissioner Cheeseman.
I'm sorry, apologies.
Good morning, Attorney Minikowski.
Morning.
I have to say to everybody, may the 4th be with you.
I was going to say it. You beat me.
I know. I couldn't resist. So I appreciate that overview. The judge, I want to just pick up on a couple of things you said. The judge didn't say you got these issues wrong, or there may be something's off here in terms of fact or law. Didn't the case in the remand center on process?
That's completely correct, Commissioner Beecher. And I was actually going to touch on this later on a separate issue, but I'll happily discuss it now. It's important to recognize what happened in that case. This wasn't a case where the company litigated the merits of their claims about the rate plan. It went before the judge, and the judge said, hey, Pura, you misapplied 1619E, or there's a serious factual error in the record. The case wasn't remanded on the merits. We'd be in a very different situation if the Superior Court had said, I've reviewed the rate plan, I've reviewed Pura's decision. These are not just and reasonable rates. There's a serious legal error. Then that would be different. What happened here was the company alleged a number of initial claims, conducted extensive document discovery, which I may add is exceptionally rare in administrative appeals, which are normally confined to the administrative record. And at the conclusion of that, Pura's counsel put a filing before the court that said, we concede that these initial procedural errors did occur and were improper. So this was really process. At that point, the court did have to sustain the appeal and remand it, but it never reached the merits of whether the actual rate plan that this authority issued violated the law in any way. That was an open question that the court just never got to because of those threshold procedural issues related to motion rulings and the votes and the signing of authority orders that were raised before the court.
Okay, so the judge's remedy was to provide for this process, and the commissioners are being asked, to some extent everybody, to be time travelers, to go back to mid-2024 when hearings were happening, and reconsider those items of prioritized by the companies to render a decision, with the benefit of, a new panel, frankly. I mean, that's where we are, and so it's really about that, and and that's a bounded process is what you're saying, right?
Yes, I would agree, Commissioner. I mean, this is a case where the court said the decision that came out via the wrong procedure. So go back and do it again to make sure that the decision that comes out, whatever it says, came out upon proper procedure. So really, this is a procedural remand. I recognize that the company had a bevy of additional claims that had we reached the merits, the court would have considered, like in several of the other rate case appeals that have happened in recent years. We just never got there. So really, that's why the court's remand order said what it said. And I think just to contextualize it a bit further, the UAPA governs all administrative process. That includes DMV license revocations, when your hunting license gets revoked, things like that. Rate making is sort of at the extreme of that, given how complex it is compared to some other administrative processes that our other agencies conduct. And so the court's options under the UAPA were to limit it back, were to send this back to PURA. But obviously, rate making, as you've alluded to, Commissioner Beecher, is a temporal exercise. It's a look at the company at a certain point of time. So we are in this strange situation where we're now working towards a new final decision on a rate application from 2023. So like I said, I understand the company's impulse to update some of these items, but I would submit at this point, 3 years later, it might just be best to file a new rate plan.
Thank you. And just one last point. So it sounds like, you're saying, and it can be acknowledged that stuff happens after a rate case. I mean, I always used to say, like, as soon as you set the rates, they're wrong, because the real world happens after that. Everything up to that point is our best effort to set rates at a sufficient level, right? And so, but all kinds of stuff happens in the macroeconomic environment, in the weather and sales trends and cost trends and so on. So that's always the case. And in this case, you're right. There a lot of time has passed. So, but nonetheless, well, in many ways, because all these variables can change, doesn't that even compound the challenge of trying to introduce selectively certain items?
Yes, and that's our exact concern, Commissioner, is, there's, I think it's 7 or 8 major issues that the company has flagged, and we've also weighed in on them in our statement and plan to today. But just looking at those in isolation ignores the fact that everything else in the rate plan has probably changed too, given the intervening time. And so that's why I said the customers and the company would end up with a rather strange decision here, where some of the material reflects the status quo 3 years ago, and then 7 or 8 issues reflect today. And that's just not how rates should be made. We shouldn't be plucking from different years and time periods and putting together a rate plan that way. It should reflect the state of the company and the cost of service at that given point in time to ensure that customers are paying what is fair and that the company is receiving the revenues it needs to operate safely.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Beecher. And I see Attorney Vaughn, I will give you the last word, but I want to see if any other parties or interveners want to hop in before I turn the podium over to you. Attorney General, Attorney Lopez?
Just briefly, sorry. Thank you. I just wanted to note that Attorney Minikowski said pretty much everything that I would say. I do want to note that, ultimately, we are where we are, and the company has an opportunity to file a new rate case if they want to present new evidence, right? And I think one of the, we have to look at this holistically, right? There's the evidence in the record that is from their application and was, filed by all of the experts in the underlying rate case. And so that can be considered anew by the new panel. And that's what we're here to do. So I think, there are things that we would focus on, but even if we focused on some of the things that the company wanted to focus on, some of the things that either OCC or EOE may want to, or the Attorney General's office may want to focus on, ultimately, the commissioners, you have the burden of reviewing the entire record, not a new, but not new evidence into that record. And if the company wants to introduce new evidence, they may file a new rate case. So that's really all I'd like to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Attorney Vaughn?
Thank you very much, Commissioner Cheeseman and Commissioner Beecher, for your question.
And do speak up, because we're getting a lot of fan noise. Thank you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, thank you.
I'll move a little closer. Thank you very much for your questions. I didn't want to speak about the appeal too much. I understand it's in the past, and I understand that this is a new panel of commissioners who did not participate in the underlying docket. I don't want to downplay, though, that this is just that the court did not reach the merits because of some minor procedural issues. The court said, in light of the procedural errors outlined above and the public interest involved in setting utility rates, the court concludes that rather than making a decision based on a record compiled in an unfair hearing process, the far better course is to remand this matter as set forth herein, such that any decision on the merits of a final rate decision can be based on a record that was compiled fairly. In the recent decision from March 9th, the court said that it remanded pursuant to 4183J for a new rate proceeding and to compile a new record. And I disagree with Attorney Minikowski's assertion that 4183J prohibits PURA from considering new evidence where it is appropriate. I understand 4183H to be a circumstance where the court retains jurisdiction over the appeal, remands for additional evidence to be considered and determined, and then that additional evidence is then considered by the court in the main appeal. So it would retain jurisdiction. That's not what happened here. I think it is a matter of fundamental fairness that our rates be set based on our actual costs and based on that, and that they be set to recover the capital that the company has invested over the years. Again, I hope that this is a one-time outcome that for everyone involved, and that something like this never happens again, where we have, you know, such a holistic remand that where everything has to be reconsidered after the passage of time. But I do believe you have the ability to do so, and I think fundamental fairness weighs towards doing so.
Thank you, Attorney. By compiling new evidence, though, is that new evidence around what was happening at the time with the specified rate year? Or is it new evidence unlimited? I mean, and both in scope and time frame, because if that's the case, then that opens everything. That's a new rate case.
So what we have provided is a update to the plant and service that the company has invested from May of 2024 through March of 2026. In the underlying case, the companies provided information on two distinct periods, right? They began with providing their actual plant and service from I believe December, from 2021 for SCG and 2022 for CNG, because that was the end of their prior rate plans, through September 30th of 2023. That was the actual plant and service when we filed the case. Then they had rate year capital investments that they provided documentation on, which ran through October 31st of 2025. As the case progressed, the company provided monthly updates to PURA to move essentially investment that had occurred from the interim period or from the rate year bucket into the actual bucket. So what we've done here is provide the actual plant and service through March of 2026. Now, we could update that to bucketize it in a different way, such that it's presented with what was provided through the rate year versus what's new. But I do think that much of this information is in the underlying case. It was just moving from one bucket to another. And again, we do stand ready to the extent PURA requires or deems it appropriate, that additional process is necessary. You know, we stand ready to answer interrogatories about what we filed, or to swear witnesses to speak to what we filed. Or we would like PURA to be comfortable rendering a decision on the information that we have filed that sets rates for a future period based on an appropriate, it puts the company in an appropriate financial position. I don't believe that the remedy for what occurred here is to say the company can just file a new rate case. Each of those rate cases costs about $3 million for the companies to file respectively, not including the cost of the other experts, the time and effort, thousands and thousands of hours that went into it. And I don't believe that the intent of this should be to say, okay, well, you just have to file again.
So how does evidence, including data through 2026, help me make a decision about something in front of me for the rate year specified in this case? In other words, again, going back to 2024 as a time traveler, how does 2026 data help me make the decision about that item without opening everything up? I mean,
Sure.
it seems a bit of a paradox.
Sure. I think it helps Pura establish rates that comport with 1619E, which require that the rates set for the company allow the company to recover the cost of its capital. And I think that that's all we were endeavoring to do. I understand that there is a delta here. I mean, but the rate year is over. So we're now setting rates for a future period that contemplates a prior rate year. So we are in a unique circumstance where I think Pura is going to need to use its discretion to establish those new rates for that future period.
Okay, but like going, so if I'm in 2024, how do I deem plant in service in 2026 as prudent and used and useful? How do I do that? In other words, if I'm making if we are revisiting this case, how do we
Well,
incorporate those costs into revenue requirements?
Well, I guess, are we?
Again, it seems like we're making a finding that is legally and factually impossible.
Well, I guess I would, not to answer your question with another question, but are you intending to set rates effective as of the beginning of the prior rate year? And go back and say, this is what the rate should have been, or are you setting rates for the future period? Because I think if we're setting rates for the future period, then we need to consider what has actually occurred. And if we're setting rates for the prior period, then I think that's a different answer.
But isn't it the future period as specified by the test year in the case before us? And then once set, that goes forward, that stays until you decide you need to come in, right? I mean, the cases are, once the rates are set, that's prospective until the next case or other adjustments that might come along.
Yes, but I do believe the effective date of the rate year would matter for those things.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. And because so much of this is focused on process, I am going to take a brief recess and consult with my other two commissioners, and we will render a ruling as to the state of play with the party's statement of the case, the applicant's statement of the case, and the admissibility of new evidence. So we shall return shortly. Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna make that. There were other ways to go about whatever else they wanted to do. I'm not in charge.
Yep.
I just report to the guy that's in charge.
Yeah.
I want that.
Buddy did it.
Thanks. Dude, I got some,
Yes.
Sorry.
It's gonna get there.
I know, we wouldn't. Well, I didn't want to like stand up there, right?
relaxing. Keep them going in the back. My golf days are done. I don't know what I'm gonna do, but we'll see. For my own, for my own, what do you call it? I'll be around part-time probably.
We're trying.
No, this was kind of like, you know. Off the wall, sorry. Been a long time, you know.
They're probably.
I don't know.
It's supposed to be something in the prior time, yeah.
I probably done a couple hundred. It's, we've had some crazy, you know, especially like with the small companies, you know. Used to have. Started by 70. We're talking like a lot, you know? Yeah, I mean, yeah. No, like a lot of them were, we had some small ones that were like, you know, mom and pop developments and stuff. I mean, we actually worked with Kara CPA. We did like a staff, we did staff assistant case where like we helped companies put their applications together. They would come like with a, I'm not kidding you, like a shoebox of receipts and like a handwritten ledger, you know, of where they spent money.
Everything was a
Yes, I tried to, what do you call it? And this guy took a water company, he was like a well driller and stuff like that. Developer said, I got a deal for you, you can take over this water. Yeah.
All right. Hello again. The commissioners have consulted and we are sustaining my ruling. The record in the case will be confined to the notice of admitted evidence in those dockets. Now, having established that, because the new evidence appears to be intertwined in the statement of the issues, I'd like interveners to weigh in on how we should proceed in this matter. Should we require the statement of the case as submitted by the applicants an impermissible filing and they be required to file again absent that? Is it enough that that new evidence be stricken from the record? Or are you satisfied that authorities, staff, and the commissioners will simply not consider that new evidence as we move forward in our deliberations? So, Attorney Minikowski?
I'll start. Thank you, Commissioner. I think the best way to proceed for clarity in the administrative record would be for the authority to issue written notice that the new evidence elements of the company's filing are stricken from that filing and will not be considered. There are other portions of that filing that I believe can stand independently, and rather than have the company rewrite it. Of course, I think if the authority wanted to allow them to resubmit, as long as other parties had the chance to respond or resubmit as well, I think that would be fair. But I think just so the record is clear, that those elements regarding new evidence are stricken from the record. I think that would convey it to any interested party that were to review these proceedings. Thank you.
Right. Other parties or interveners?
EOE agrees with that position. Thank you.
Attorney McCormick.
OAG agrees with that position as well. Thank you.
Attorney Vaughn?
Thank you. I'll just note an objection for the record. I know that you sustained Attorney Minikowski's objection, but just to preserve our rights for any potential future litigation, I'll note an objection for the record. I don't believe that any striking is necessary, but and I believe we can present our argument and briefing in a manner that comports with Pura's ruling.
All right. Well, we will issue a ruling with regard to the official statement. But if you want to proceed with the understanding that we cannot refer to any new evidence as we go forward.
Thank you.
We'll issue a motion with regard to that. But again, I'll just remind all parties that we will not be considering any new evidence as we proceed in hearing the statement of the case.
Thank you.
All right. All right. I think the show is yours now, Attorney Vaughn, having gotten through those elements.
Thank you. And just before I begin, I'll note a congratulations to Mr. Sobolewski, just to bring it back to the pre-hearing discussion. Good morning, Commissioners Cheeseman, Beecher, and Smith. Connecticut Natural Gas Corporation and the Southern Connecticut Gas Company greatly appreciate the opportunity to be here today regarding Pura's consideration of each company's revenue requirements and rates on remand from docket number 231102. We recognize that this may be uncomfortable and it's an unfortunate situation for you, as no member of this commission was present for the underlying case, and we're appreciative of your willingness to hear us out and to strike an appropriate balance for the future rates that right set each company's financial condition and allows the companies and all parties to move forward. In November 2023, the companies submitted applications requesting modest increases in base distribution rates, with CNG requesting an increase of 19.7 million and SCG requesting an increase of 43.2 million. In November 24, Pura issued final decisions that ruled against the companies on all material matters and instead ordered rate decreases of 24.6 million for CNG and 10.79 million for SCG. Each company appealed, and we're here today because in November 2025, the Connecticut Superior Court sustained those appeals. We appreciated the opportunity to file our statement of the issues. We know that you read everything and are paying attention to what we file, and we stand by that. We're ready to discuss and respond to your questions with any supplementary information that you may need or any discussion that you may like to have with our subject matter experts. On remand, the companies are requesting that Pura establish correct and legal revenue requirements that address the company's revenue requirements holistically, focusing on 6 major claims that the companies raised on appeal and 1 additional claim not raised on appeal, specifically the DIMP cap. In the company's April 27, 2026 statement of issues, they each proposed revenue requirements for effect in August that account for these and accept many of the downward adjustments from the underlying decisions in an effort to move beyond the past issues that we have experienced and towards a more productive and financially sound future. For CNG specifically, in the underlying case, it proposed a modest increase of $19.7 million. Pura instead ordered a decrease of $24.6 million. And in the company's statement of issues, it now seeks an adjustment relative to prior rates of $6.234 million. SCG proposed in 231102 an increase of $43.29 million, and instead Pura ordered a decrease of $10.7 million. SCG now seeks an increase from prior rates of $19.01 million. Both of these proposed adjustments are reflected in attachments 1 and 2 of the company's statement of issues, which provided an updated version of late filed 1 and late filed 211 that recalculated the company's revenue requirements, accepting many of the downward adjustments from the underlying case and providing certain information that was disputed in the statement of the issues. We feel that this strikes an appropriate balance for the future to enable the companies to move past what occurred, recognizing that the rate year is done and we are now in a future period. So we are seeking approval of those files. It's important to put in context that the companies never should have been charging the rates that were on the unnaturally low rates that were approved in the underlying case. Those were product of unlawful procedures, which I won't go into here. But so the increase relative to the decision may seem somewhat high, but we really need to be comparing this against the prior rates that were in effect. I think that that's important to contextualize because it really reflects the state of the world. So our statement of the case is about 70 pages long, and I appreciate you all for reading it, single-spaced. It includes several attachments, and I won't seek to reiterate all of that here, but I will highlight 4 key areas of concern for the companies. The first is ROE. We are specifically asking for the ROE penalty imposed on each company associated with, quote, underutilized mains and services to be removed. I don't believe that ROE penalty was warranted in the underlying case. It was imposed in the final decision, not in the draft decision. It was not asked for by any party. And the company has demonstrated in its statement of the issues that, first of all, it met the purported test to lift that penalty when the penalty was imposed, and also highlighted for the commission underlying record evidence to support the propriety of those investments and why they were made at the time they were made, which is the hallmark of a prudence review. The penalty should be eliminated. The company is also seeking that this Pura Commission take a refreshed look at the company's return on equity. In the underlying case, the company's proposed and supported an ROE of 10.2%. We believe that the record evidence continues to support that. However, in attachments 1 and 2, the company's utilized for illustrative purposes an ROE of 9.48%, which reflects the current ROE approved most recently for a natural gas utility in Connecticut, Yankee Gas. I'm aware that on Friday, I believe, Thursday or Friday, recently, the Hazardville Water decision came out, which approved an ROE of 9.5. It's evident and supported in our statement of issues that the return on equity for utilities in the state of Connecticut for electric, water, and gas companies is in the range of 9.4 to 9.5, not 9.2, and that should be reevaluated. The next main issue that the companies seek reconsideration of on remand is capital. Now, the companies have been, since they experienced these decreases, the companies have been continuing to meet their obligations to invest in the system and to provide safe and reliable natural gas distribution service to their customers. In the statement of issues, we provided an update of capital, providing in the similar format to has been provided in the underlying case, which provided an update of capital investment and plant and service from May 2024 to March 2026. I won't harp on the details given the ruling that we discussed prior about new evidence, but I will say that the company's underlying case provided for investments through the rate year, which was a longstanding Pura practice, and the company's actuals are in line with that, maybe slightly under, and Pura can and should on remand provide for rate base that accounts for capital investment that was once future rate year capital, but is now in service and closed to plant and serving customers. In the underlying case, that value was cut off as of the close of the, as of April 30th. But given the passage of time, what was once rate year capital is now close to plant and in service. Pura has for many years accepted, or did for many years accept, the inclusion of rate year capital in plant and should do so here. The company also in the underlying case proposed a reconciliation mechanism to give Pura comfort that if it was approving rate year capital, we would provide reporting and reconciliation and future prudence review in a subsequent rate case. And I believe that that can be utilized in this case to provide the company with the rate support that it needs, subject to a future prudence review. The company's demonstrated in their statement of issues that absent the recovery of future capital, they will never be able to earn their return on equity, authorized or not, 9.2 or 10.2, it doesn't matter. They will not be able to earn that. And we showed that to you in the figures provided in our statement of issues. Consistent with 1619E, we should be allowed to recover what was once our rate year capital. If Pura is not going to consider the evidence on capital through March of 2026, we do believe that there is sufficient evidence in the record to allow for the recovery of the plant and service that we provided through at least October 31 of 2025. The next major issue that I'd like to talk about is fixed cost investment credits, or FCIC. We have subject.
I'm sorry. Sorry. Whoops. Delayed reaction there. So isn't the issue though in the case, isn't the issue about the used and useful plant for that period, for that rate year?
Well, what do you mean the issue, commissioners? Beecher?
That the penalty was for underutilized plant based on unrealized contracts.
Yeah.
That's different from ongoing plant additions. This was specific to this underutilized plant, and there are two remedies. There's either disallowance, or there's, in this case, the authority opted for a return penalty. And I'm assuming the company's position would be like neither of the above.
Correct. So I believe that our statement of issues goes into this in great, or I shouldn't say I believe, our statement of issues goes into this in quite some detail. But my position would be that there was no prudence review of those actions, right? So if we're talking about underutilized plants, so the companies made investments based on customer contracts that they signed up. And then some customers, for a variety of reasons, maybe don't end up installing the meter, right? So they took some sort of payment, and the company made investment, and then for whatever reason, financial situation, a bankruptcy, things like that, the customer didn't end up following through. And what we provided on the record was evidence to document that many of those instances were, like I just said, changed financial conditions or medical hardship. I believe that's cited too in our statement of issues. And we do have Mr. Boria here who can speak to that. And that's the hallmark of the prudence review, right? Is why did you take the steps you took at the time you took them? So we signed up a customer based on a run rate, based on what that return would be, and we made investment, right? And then the customer didn't follow through on their end of the bargain, and we provided information as to why that occurred. And then in the final decision, they said, well, you should have maybe gone after these people, or sent them to collections, or sued them, or taken some other step. And I do think that is an after the fact, like a hindsight review of what one should have done. So what we proved up in written exceptions, and I think was ultimately changed, is that those mains and services are gassed and are used and useful in the sense that they are live gas mains. They were providing some degree of pressure support, and they were capable of serving customers. They just didn't have meters fixed, or some of them just didn't have meters fixed. And then what we ended up with was this ROE penalty. But I suggest that in this instance, neither penalty, either or disallowance, is appropriate.
Okay, so they're useful to the operating system. And I understand that it would be reasonable practice that once a service is in place, it doesn't make a lot of sense to tear it up, right? I understand that, you referenced that. But it's not used and useful to ratepayers at that point, right? I mean, and should ratepayers bear that risk that apparently materialized of of customers not taking service? So that's a risk, right? And aren't you asking by your proposed treatment that ratepayers assume that risk, when your returns compensate you as a business, and we're substituting for the marketplace? Isn't it supposed to work that way, where you bear that risk instead of ratepayers?
I don't believe we're asking ratepayers to bear risk in perpetuity. I think we're speaking about a discrete subsection of mains and services that happened at a period in time, right? And in my view, every rate case that I do is a learning experience, right? And it's a learning experience for me as the attorney, and for the company as well, right? And you come out of a rate case and you say, what happened there, and what did I learn, and what do I need to do moving forward, right? So I believe at the time that we filed this case, those investments were appropriate to have been made, and the risk, I don't believe that we were engaging in system expansion, which was the policy at the time sort of preceding this rate case until it was not. And we acted appropriately in our dealings with our customers. And now we've come out of that in a way that says maybe the commission at the time, and if this commission feels similarly, maybe we need to switch up our practices and our policies. But that doesn't mean that that hindsight investment becomes imprudent.
So going back to 2024, which is still in the larger scheme of things, not that long ago, there was clearly, and you recognize in your statement, there was a recognition that the authority's policy had changed with regard to system expansion. And I think you'd also probably agree, I'll ask you, do you agree also that the industry was starting to recognize potential structural changes, whether due to economic forces or clean energy transition policies and so on, that the industry is facing a new world as compared to, say, the electric industry or even the water industry? Like there are structural factors at work. I think they were well recognized by credit rating agencies and others around, by that, certainly before and during that time period. So tell us a little bit more. You just mentioned briefly, but did you respond strategically at that time back in 2024 or in the period leading up to the case? Like, were you reacting strategically to those forces at work?
I don't know if I can put on a time machine. What I will say is at the time, I do believe this case was filed in sort of a sweet spot of maybe what I'd frame as anti-gas sentiment, right? It was sort of, right, it was some states preceding this rate case had instituted dockets to review what the plan was for natural gas and moving forward and how potentially to address natural gas in the future state. I know Massachusetts had instituted one in 2020 that came out around 2023, and other states had done the same. Connecticut at that time had not, and I don't believe has to date. I know in the affordability era, which we've sort of swung to from a little bit, natural gas is still relevant, and many people are still using it to heat their homes, and there is still growth and modest growth. I do believe what I can say is that the company reacted to the closure of the system expansion plan and complied with those directives. But I would need, I think, a little bit of time to prepare on the strategic follow-up that they undertook.
So isn't there, you mentioned, the shifting environment, but a lot of the current environment is actually around, or well, I shouldn't say this. I mean, could be around using gas as a fuel for power generation as compared to transitioning folks to electrification, end users. There's a bit of a, the future, I guess, will be about making those choices about where does the gas go and how it's maintained, right?
I think that there's a plethora of steps that could be taken, and I believe in the underlying case what the company's witness, Mr. Langland, said about the future of gas was that there needed to be a sort of statewide discussion that occurred, much as occurred in Massachusetts. That didn't exist in this case. The company proposed certain clean energy investments, which were denied, and the company did not propose like a comprehensive future energy strategy because this was a one-year rate plan. So we were sort of coming to grips with the fact that Pura was no longer going to provide for multi-year rate plans. And so when we filed this case, to be candid with you, we had just received our an order for United Illuminating in its 2022 rate case that rejected the company's 3-year rate plan. And we were ordered to come in or be subject to a review and potential rate decrease. So we proposed 1-year rate plans that addressed the past state
provided for rate year capital, provided for clean energy investment at an appropriate scale, and said that we needed a comprehensive statewide review. But that did not occur, and I don't believe has occurred since this rate case was issued.
Okay, thank you. But you do cite, and this will be my last point, I think you do cite in your statement, the 2022 decision. Sorry, I don't have the case in front of me, but that mentions, sort of putting the brakes on system expansion planning, right?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And we did comply with that decision, and I don't believe that I believe that the underutilized mains, we could probably dig this up, but the investments were made under system expansion, I believe, prior to that closure. Commissioner Smith?
Good morning. So do you happen to recall from the record for the discrete section we're talking about here of underutilized mains, what percentage of those mains had customer contracts?
All of them.
All of them, okay. So that would be in normal accordance with the practice of the company. You have a certain level of contracts before you put in your capital equipment, your PP&E.
Yes, I believe that the company, I'm checking with Mr. Boria, and if we have detailed questions, we can bring him up. He is the system expansion subject matter expert. But yes, it's my understanding that much like any, before any investment was made, they sort of did a run rate calculation and figured out, does this investment make sense, and what amount of money do we need to get from the customer, and what do they, agree to do? And they
Okay,
had
so-
contract in the record.
And so why I wonder about this is I'm just curious do you think that when a customer has a contract and then abrogates the contract or doesn't go forward with what their promise was, is that default and such analogous to an uncollectible account if the same customer doesn't pay their bill? In terms of they made a promise they didn't fulfill, and now the company has a problem?
Yes, I do. I think that was sort of one of the issues that came up came up in the final decision, at least, which was, why didn't you, pursue judgment on these contracts?
Mhm.
And I think that could be a valid question, right? It is hindsight based. And I do think that the company provided some information on, okay, well, this was, there was a bankruptcy, or there was the customer indicated a changed financial condition such that they couldn't comply. And I do think that, again, contextualizing the time frame that this case occurred in, and the investment, the period that we're talking about, is coming out of COVID-19, right? So there's a lot of customer protections as far as the collections of the company go, right? And we moved away from our Nair and Levin, the company's law firm that pursued judgments from uncollected bills. And I do think at the time there were maybe headwinds against taking customers to court who indicated that they thought they could have paid, or should have paid at one time, ultimately had some sort of job loss or changed financial condition, and then could not.
Mhm.
So I do think that is part of the argument we made, which was that, Pura said, well, you should have taken these people to court. I believe that is a hindsight review of what we've done, and we indicated why we took the steps that we took.
So when you have an uncollectible account, if a customer doesn't pay the bill, who bears the risk of that?
Well, the company always takes steps to minimize uncollectible bill payments through a variety of ways. We have the matching payment program and the bill forgiveness program, and I'm sure I'm conflating some of the electrical terminology. We have low income discount rates, but I mean, uncollectibles in customer bills are a cost of business that we collect ultimately from customers, right? We seek to minimize that because they are socialized.
So I'm sorry to be like a dog with a bone here, but so when you have an uncollectible account though, and you can't collect it, who bears the financial cost of that? The shareholder or the ratepayer?
I think we have an uncollectible rate that is determined in a rate case, and then I don't believe we get to fluctuate that year to year. But I think that when we come in for a rate case, they kind of determine what the uncollectible percentages, and they vet that and vet the activities that the company takes. But ultimately, that rate is determined in a rate case and collected from customers.
Okay, thank you.
If I may add, though, as you said, you try to manage these costs, and isn't your management of those costs subject to a prudence review? In other words, you don't get,
Yes, I agree. I would
Okay.
posit that a prudence review did not occur here.
okay. Okay, so you're saying that the record evidence does not speak to the issue of prudence in relation to these, this plant?
At the time, a prudence review, as we know from the recent Aquarian case, or as was most recently articulated by the Aquarian decision, a prudence review asks to the company's investments to be evaluated based on what the company knew at the time that it made the investments and the decisions that it made.
Okay, isn't it?
It is a hindsight evaluation to say, you should have sued this particular customer.
Okay, but isn't generally a rate case is a prudence review, right? I mean,
Yes, that is a prudence review should be accomplished in a rate case, but the aspects that are reviewed for prudence should be articulated. Yes.
okay, thank you.
But a rate case occurring does not make reviews a prudence review, if that makes sense. It doesn't accomplish just by function, like the order is not just a prudence review. Pura has to say, this is what I evaluated to determine that these investments were prudent or imprudent.
Well, but isn't every element allowed in the revenue requirement a reflection of the authority's judgment of prudence along with other standards, used and useful, efficient, and so on? Doesn't that authorized revenue requirement and authorized rate of return, doesn't that reflect our judgment about prudence?
Yes, it does, but it doesn't. You do, I think, have to walk through the elements of conducting the actual prudence review.
Thank you.
Any more questions on underutilized plant?
I believe we're satisfied on that one for the time being. If you want to proceed, I think you were discussing capital. Had you?
I
made
had
your-
moved on to fixed cost investment credits,
right.
I believe. You'll bear with me a moment. So again, with respect to FCIC, there are subject matter experts here who can discuss in more detail, but FCIC comes with investment, but you need taxable income to monetize those credits. In 2018, the companies began taking tax basis repairs, which have the benefit of reducing rate base, but challenge the company's ability to monetize FCIC. The decision allows the customers to take the benefit from both to allow customers to benefit from both tax basis repairs and FCIC, the companies proposed a very modest revenue requirement increase that would allow the companies to recover unutilized FCIC. Pura rejected this proposal, saying that if we wanted to monetize FCIC, we should effectively stop taking repairs, which results in higher rates to customers for the years to come. As we explained in our statement of issues, this should be reversed. It's an asymmetric treatment of providing benefits to the company and customers, and we believe that the revenue requirements established in this proceeding should offer the companies a clear path to cost recovery for expired FCIC, even if the companies take tax basis repairs. And the final main issue that I'd like to discuss with you today is depreciation. I won't get into depreciation. It's discussed at length in our statement of issues, so I won't get into all of the details here. But the companies are asking for the depreciation rates to be reset. The rates established by the decision are out of line and are one of the main elements of credit rating downgrades experienced by the company. The companies are challenging the net salvage computation reflected in depreciation rates as set forth in our statement of the issues. And we believe that the computation provided in the decisions is not supported by the record, and it pushes costs onto future customers.
So I just want to jump in on the depreciation question, if I may. And I believe that, if I'm summarizing correctly, the disagreement with regard to OCC's treatment and the company's treatment was that OCC was looking at a sort of 5-year historical cost going for, the past 5-year historical cost, whereas you were looking at a much longer time frame. And I suppose my question is, surely, if you're looking at something 20, 30 years ago, simply by virtue of the fact that we have seen inflationary pressures, that in itself might decrease the total cost, whereas that most recent 5 years would provide a much more accurate picture of the situation. So I'm happy to have someone weigh in on
Thank
just
you, and
that.
I'll ask Mr. Hurwitz to come speak depreciation
All
with
right,
you. I
thank
don't
you.
want to translate.
I know depreciation is a very arcane language.
I think there certainly is the 5 years versus a longer historical period issue, but I think the more pertinent disagreement is that, in our view, OCC just studied net salvage in terms of dollars. We studied net salvage as a ratio to retirements. So I think even if you were to apply our method only to the 5 most recent years of data as described in our statement of issues, we'd still come out with net salvage recommendations that are similar to our proposals. It's not just about the length of the data being studied, but rather how you analyze that data. And we cited quotes from NARUC manuals and other, regulators in support of our position.
So explain to me in simple terms how that, including it as a percentage of retirement, so alters the calculation.
Because in the 5-year period being studied by OCC, as we quoted an exchange with our depreciation expert, Mr. Alice, at hearing, where he explained that for the particular account in question, I think it was like CNG services, in the 5-year period studied by OCC, the companies recorded on average $640,000 of retirements in each year, but we had over 300 million of retirements to come. So in the future, by definition, the amount of plant being retired must increase. I think Ned said something to the effect of it would take 554 years to depreciate all of our property at $640,000 a year, but the depreciable lives set in the decision are closer to 50 to 60 on average. So it's an issue that the 5-year period being studied, if you only study it in terms of dollars of expenditure per year, is not comparable or reasonable to expect going forward.
So you're maintaining that 5-year period grossly underestimated the number of retirements, and that in itself skews the calculation?
If you were to study net salvage purely in terms of expenditures, and this is the reason, in our view, why authoritative depreciation texts like the NARUC manuals say that net salvage is best studied as a percentage of retirements, which is exactly what we did.
All right. Yes, Commissioner Beecher.
Might as well stay there. Good morning. Good to see you. Boy, I'm having a flashback for when I first started working at the Illinois Commission. I was trying to figure out why they cared so much about depreciation. And now I know. Spent the weekend on it. First of all, NARUC is not a standard setting body. Is that correct?
I'm not sure what you mean by standard setting.
I mean, in other words, there's NARUC references. Actually, the one guidance manual is from 1996. I mean, NARUC is informs us and provides guidance, but it's technically, it doesn't set a standard. Authorities, even the uniform systems of accounts that they'll promulgate are often adapted by commissions and authorities around the country to serve their regulatory needs. Isn't that correct?
I have counsel here. My understanding is not that you're legally obligated to follow NARUC, but I do understand that it is frequently seen as an authoritative text that is consulted in the setting of depreciation rates.
Thank you.
I agree with that, Commissioner Beecher. I believe that there was quite a bit of back and forth between the depreciation experts on this over what the NARUC manual said and why it said what it said and what it means. So I completely agree that the NARUC manual does not direct PURA to adopt a specific approach, but it is informative and a learned text for experts such as Mr. Alice.
Yeah, but certainly, I mean, since some of these early texts were developed, so much has changed technologically and even the conditions in which assets are operated, in terms of, weather effects and demographic effects and everything, that they could certainly affect this. So it does take some deliberation, and it is ultimately a policy decision. I mean, depreciation expense does a couple things for you, right? I mean, it's the return of capital fundamentally from a financial perspective. But here we're talking about trying to prepare for retirements, right? We're trying to build in what will be negative salvage value. In the good old days, perhaps there was like a hope for positive, and now we're really talking about that. Is that correct? We're talking about trying to build in a sufficient value for the cost of removal of assets. Is that correct?
I would say it this way. I think what we're trying to accomplish by including depreciation in the revenue requirement is to have the customers who benefit from assets be the same as the customers who pay for those assets. We're trying to maintain intergenerational equity, and it's a practical reality that retiring the assets we have installed today will generate some degree of gross salvage value at the end of the life, and also some degree of cost of removal. I do agree with you. The circumstances in which we operate change over time. That's why our depreciation experts studied data over many decades. And a point we made in our statement of the issues is that if you were to study CNG's mains and services data for the last 10 years, not one single time did we see net salvage rates that were comparable to what OCC had recommended. And just one quick point on the NARUC manual, as I said before, I will not sit here and argue that you are legally obligated to follow its recommendations, but I do think you are obligated to at least characterize its recommendations correctly. And the decision as it stands, as we see it, cherry picks one single sentence from the introduction on this issue. And if you were to continue reading, it, I think, pretty clearly indicates that the method we've proposed is the one that it recommends. And we cited some sections in our statement of the issues where we feel the rates approved by PURA in the underlying decision deviate. And so we felt that that element of the original decision was at best misleading.
Okay, so I think we agree that so depreciation expense is a return of capital. We try as best we can to align the recovery of that cost with the customers who benefit from that asset. So I think that's the intergenerational equity issue that you're raising, which appropriately. But where it gets really tricky is we don't know if there'll be a positive or a negative when that asset comes due, right? We don't really know. And so again, it raises this issue of ratepayer risk, right? If ratepayers, if we're collecting too much over time because there's a positive value at the end, that's an issue. If we're creating too little and future customers, have to pay, that's a problem. So we're trying, that's the art of depreciation, right? And
sorry, Commissioner Beecher, I know Attorney Vaughn, you said your taxation expert was going to be leaving at noon.
Oh.
Can we suspend this discussion on depreciation for a brief period, if you don't mind, just in case there are any questions with regard to taxation? I want to be respectful of everybody's time and the ability to ask questions.
Thank you both. Yes, absolutely. I guess I would put to you if there are any if you have any questions on the FCIC or other tax issues raised, please let us know and we'll.
All right. So I believe that was, and I'll check with the other commissioners if they have any questions with regard to the taxation issues.
I actually would like OCC to speak to that, so I don't want your expert to leave while we ask Attorney Minikowski, sorry to put you on the spot, but if you'd care to comment on whether consumers lost potential tax basis repairs, is that how you are addressing that issue, if you don't mind?
And as I say, apologies for jumping around here, but I figure we might as well get the questions in while we have the experts in the room.
Thank you.
Proceed, please. Thank you.
Thank you. On the FCIC issue, we actually had not substantively address that. That was an issue that we hadn't briefed in the underlying proceeding. It came from the authority. You know, the company's ability to use the repair tax deductions reduces income tax, which decreases revenue requirements. Our recommendation on this issue would simply be that, as this was a Pura staff issue, that Pura staff simply review that issue in the authority's reconsideration of the or remand of the decision to ensure that the companies are using the full level of repair tax reductions that are allowed by state and federal income tax rules. And that's where we would rest on that issue. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
All right, well, I would love, as we have your tax expert here, for him to sort of give a brief synopsis as to why this would be why the applicant's view is more appropriate than the decision Pura staff raised.
Absolutely. And we'll bring up Mr. Bieber, who is the company's tax vice president, I believe.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to clarify things. In very high-level terms, the company is seeking to align tax costs with what we actually enjoy on the tax return. The way the decision was issued, it is giving customers a benefit that we are not enjoying, because we are losing value in our tax credits because the tax deductions that we claimed, which we believe are more customer favorable, are diminishing the value of the credits. So as the order stands, customers are now getting value for credits we don't get to enjoy.
So in terms of how the company filed these taxes, and again, forgive me if I've not understood correctly, it sounds as though because of something the company didn't do, you're now seeking recovery for that?
I wouldn't characterize it as something we didn't do. The subject is complicated, but what we did was we took a tax deduction. We did not take the tax deduction in a vacuum. It's actually better for Avangrid purposes in totality. We would have preferred to have slower deductions because we would have benefited from that. But we considered the full spectrum of interest here, and we decided to pursue a tax deduction that we knew would be customer favorable. What we don't have is perfect vision into the future as to how things will ultimately play out. And so credits, you only get to use tax credits when you have taxable income to absorb those credits. And tax laws evolve, and there are constraints on how much credits you can use in any given year. And when all is said and done, we could not fully utilize the credits. So there wasn't anything wrong that we did. We simply
So changing tax law reduced your ability to use the credits, and you were seeking recovery of that. Is that correct?
I would say it's the fact that we cannot fully use. The first thing to consider simply is this. Taxable income is reduced because of repairs tax benefits. The repairs tax benefits produce rate-based credits that are of extremely high value to customers. Because we understood that, we pursued that as a change in 2018. And so taking that deduction produced the maximum benefit for customers. What we put in.
But then reduce the income so you couldn't claim the credit back? Is that your point? The customers were benefiting doubly, whereas you took a hit?
Correct. It diminished our capacity to use credits because we opted for the thing. The credits are, you can carry them forward. But you can only carry them forward for a short amount of time, 5 years. So just because you can't immediately use them doesn't mean you can't ever. So what we did in this case was balance the customer's interest and what we were experiencing in actual. And so we asked for a relatively small amount of recovery to balance out the fact that we were giving customers a very large benefit.
All right. And I believe Commissioner Beecher has
Can I ask a quick
Oh,
clarifying
but,
question?
I saw Jan first, so then you can.
This, I'll try to be quick. So, but the responsibility for accounting for these flow-through effects is really on the company, right? I mean, as you manage your tax strategy.
I think if you consider, well, let's consider the full facts. The fact is that the company has to make decisions mindful of what's happened. What's happened in Connecticut is that Connecticut Water Power Company provided huge tax benefits on tax repairs. What's happened in Connecticut is that the Attorney General opened an investigation to make sure companies were maximizing tax deductions. What's happened throughout New England is there have been investigations on this subject. So the company has a responsibility to understand what's going on in the world and to react to real-time issues.
Okay, and one last point. You would be free, wouldn't you, under our framework to amend your existing rate schedules at any time after you've elected to change your accounting method, wouldn't you?
Are you asking if we're free to file a rate case?
No, I think it's just specific to this issue, or I guess, yeah, I guess generally you could also come in for a rate. Yeah, let me put it this way, is that your only remedy, is to come in for a full rate case?
I think I think it would be if this is included in. Okay, one moment.
I think our remedy is to stop taking these deductions so that we can increase taxable income and use the credits, which we think would have a much more negative effect on customers.
But as far as you're saying, getting at about adjusting the rate at Pura, I think that it would be a rate case that would have to address those issues. Maybe there could be some sort of interim filing notifying you of something changing, but. Yeah. And I'm told the credits had not expired in the test year, which is, yeah, Mr. Hurwitz can speak to the credits a little bit.
Yeah, apologies. Your question is a little bit confusing to us, and it's not clear to us exactly what you mean. We filed a rate case where the credits had not expired in the test year, and we've laid forward what we think is our path to provide the most benefit to customers. We think we've offered a path whereby the company can take and customers can receive the benefit of both tax basis repairs and ongoing FCIC for only a very small revenue requirement cost. Could we have done something different, like not take repairs? Maybe, and to be frank, this decision has required us, in effect, to stop taking repairs, which will increase costs for customers for years to come. But our tax return for calendar year 2025 has not yet been filed, so we're hoping that there's a positive decision here that allows us to resume taking both benefits, and in future cases, providing both benefits to customers.
I apologize because it is a confusing area, but the accounting method was changed in 2018, right?
Correct.
If I understand that correctly, okay. And so you did not resolve it in these rate amendments for this case?
I don't know what you mean by resolve.
Yeah, it was not resolved to your satisfaction, I guess is what I should say in this case.
I think as Mr. Hurwitz pointed out, the expiration events became relevant in the rate year. And so that's what the subject issue is in this case, that we are trying to address the expiration element of it.
Okay. All right, I think I get it. All right, thank you.
Sorry, just a clarification. Earlier you kept saying we and our as it related to the tax return and your inability to use the tax credits. Is the we the gas company in question, or is it the consolidated tax return of the entities?
So just to be clear, thank you for the question, first of all. So each company has to use the credits. Well, the credit, we file rates on a standalone company basis. And the credits that we are speaking to are credits that we cannot enjoy, period. So these are real lost credits. Does that answer your question?
I think so, but is the inability to use the credits because of an unrelated factor somewhere in the broader consolidated tax return, or is it specifically at the gas company?
For purposes of our regulatory filing, we have reflected this based on a standalone basis, so there's no other company impacting the lost value. These are standalone computations.
Any other questions, commissioners? All right, thank you for the questions. Thank you, Attorney Vaughn, and I guess we can proceed now.
Thank you. And I believe if we wanted to go back, we were on a question about depreciation from Commissioner Beecher. And just for my own edification, if you have that written down and could restate it, that would be outstanding. And we'll get Mr. Hurwitz back up to.
So depreciation is a cash flow issue for you as well? A depreciation expense, I should say, because it's a non-cash
Yes.
expense. So that's partly one of your concerns. So you cite some examples in here. And wouldn't it be true, though, if you, that there's always the possibility, going back to the, end of life, positive or negative value, there's always that possibility of the, what was described as negative accumulated depreciation effect, which gets a little confusing, right? Because it's really an offset to the original cost for rate-based purposes. But isn't that, that's always a possibility if you are including in your depreciation expense the cost of salvage, and that's a negative number, then you're going to go negative, right? From a rate-based perspective. That's sort of mathematical reality, correct?
I do agree that recovering net salvage in instances when it's negative net salvage could result in so-called negative accumulated depreciation. But based on your question, I fear that you might be inadvertently conflating two separate things. It sounds like you're referencing Mr. Alice's description of what went wrong in Maryland when they followed recommendations like Mr. Dunkel. And I think in that context, his use of negative net salvage or negative accumulated depreciation, however he said it, was that he was communicating that the amount that had been paid by ratepayers to pay for negative net salvage was insufficient, which creates the sort of intergenerational equity that we're attempting to flag for you, because it means that customers who did not benefit from the use of a certain collection of assets are required to pay for the cost of those assets.
I think that's helpful, because that's how I read it too, what they were trying to say there. But that would only be if you were booking it that way, right? And not getting the offsetting expense. So these issues show up on the balance sheet and they show up on the income statement. Is that correct?
I'm struggling to follow, and if it helps, I
Yeah.
can just take a small step back.
Sure.
So, I think about the things that you're saying in two pieces. One is, let's imagine a hypothetical asset where depreciation was set perfectly. I think we'd use the example of an asset with maybe $5,000 original cost and $1,000 negative net salvage at the end of the life. And I think we had assumed a 40-year life. And we said in a perfect world, this asset would depreciate $150 per year, where you take $5,000 in original cost, you add $1,000 of negative net salvage, because it's supposed the negatives cancel out. Those two things add up to $6,000. $6,000 divided by 40 is $150 a year. And to, I think, half of your question, if you were to imagine the balance sheet for this asset in year 39, you would have $5,850 of accumulated depreciation, $5,000 of gross cost. So the net book value of this asset would be negative to the tune of $850. And if you flash forward to the day before the asset is retired and net salvage costs are incurred, you'd have a accumulated depreciation of $6,000, gross cost of $5,000. The net book value is negative $1,000. But then one day passes, we retire the asset, and we'll imagine by magic, all net salvage costs are incurred that same day. The net book value of this asset after it is retired would be zero because ratepayers paid for the full cost of the negative net salvage of the asset. I think what Mr. Alice was describing in that example and what we tried to carry forward in our statement of the issues is just to carry forward this hypothetical from Maryland, depreciation rates were not set at $150 per year. They were set at less than that. And I'll just make it up that for illustrative purposes in Maryland, they had set depreciation rates such that negative net salvage would be $100 instead of $1,000. So if you flash forward to the day before that asset is retired in this revised hypothetical, you have $5,000 of gross cost, $5,100 of accumulated depreciation. So you still have negative net book value, but then that next day, the asset gets retired. We incur $1,000 of negative net salvage. Now, after the asset is gone, no longer providing service to customers, ratepayers have to bear $900 of net book value for an asset that's not providing them service. And I think that's the issue that Mr. Alice was trying to highlight.
So by including the salvage, the anticipated salvage, negative salvage, you're basically asking customers to advance those funds over the life of the asset to account for that ultimate cost. Is that correct?
Yeah, or said differently, you're asking the customers who benefit from an asset to pay for the cost of that asset. And to my knowledge, there was no debate in the underlying proceeding about whether net salvage should be an element of depreciation rates at all. Rather, it was a question of how do you measure net salvage?
The rate, yeah, I agree. So do you know to what extent these assets that we're talking about qualify as an asset retirement obligation, these funds? Like, are you using that mechanism?
One moment.
Ms. Van Luling is coming up.
Hi. So an asset retirement obligation under US GAAP accounting principles is similar in concept, but it is a different standard and different types of liabilities. So when you're talking conceptually, they are similar, but we have separate asset retirement obligations that are not what Mr. Hurwitz is describing, but the accounting is similar for them.
Thank you. And so if these funds are coming in from ratepayers, how are they ring fenced or, how are those funds being maintained and where on your books are they being maintained and reported?
They are reported as a regulatory liability underneath the GAAP accounts.
Okay.
For purposes of FERC accounting, they are not a regulatory liability. They are within accumulated depreciation, but within the filed financial statements that we have on the record, they are a regulatory liability.
Okay. I did note what one thing you're worried about is I'll quote as that future customers will be, quote, stuck with a much larger rate base. So is that that's an interesting statement. So you are, doesn't that work to your advantage though, having that larger rate base?
Our position here, I mean, first, I think, no, we had our credit ratings downgraded in part because of the cash flow impacts to this. So I would question how that could be to our advantage. But I think our position here is not so much about, trying to enrich ourselves or anything like that. It's just about trying to get the customers who benefit from an asset to be the same as the customers who pay for that asset. And if rates are not set in accordance to that principle, to your point, I don't understand you to be legally required to follow the NARUC manual, but there will be negative consequences experienced by customers if that principle is not followed. I think the first negative consequence is the bill that is unpaid today will have to be paid eventually. So customers who are not benefiting from the assets generating that bill would have to pay it. Along the way, customers would also have to bear the cost of higher rate base because property that is not depreciated will remain in rate base until it is depreciated. And also because of the cash flow challenges created by this finding, the rate of return paid on that rate base will be higher, all else equal.
So there's sort of a trade-off between the cash flow of higher depreciation expense or the maintenance of the higher rate base with return without it, right? You recognize that those are sort of trade-offs.
I do see that. Oh, one moment.
Say, Mr. Hurwitz thinks on that. I believe, I would just add that I believe that, under 1619E, Pura has to set rates that maintain the company's financial condition. And I think one of our points would be that the depreciation, sorry, Commissioner Smith. Under 1619E, Pura needs to set rates that allow the company to maintain its financial condition. And in rate cases preceding this one, there was an analysis done to document that the rates that were established would not impair the company's financial condition. I don't believe that was done in this case, a so-called like total effect test, if you will, of the resultant rates. I don't believe that was done here. And I think what you can see is that the ratings agencies are telling us that the depreciation rates are not calculated correctly and that resulted in a downgrade. And so I do believe that is something that legally should be rectified in order to provide for rates that do not harm the company's financial condition. And I'll turn it over to Mr. Hurwitz to provide some substance.
No, I think that was well said. And if your questions are to some extent signaling the possibility of a shift in policy, which I guess we could debate the merits or legality of that in the future. But I think an extra point I do want to emphasize is it would be helpful to us to at least understand what the policy is. The decision as we read it seems to say, well, we're finding in favor of OCC's rates because that better reflects the company's historical experience. Well, I mean, just a simple evaluation of the evidence that OCC themselves submitted suggests that's not the case. The net salvage accruals produced by OCC's rates are a multiple of our historical experience. So it would be helpful to us to understand why OCC's multiple was selected instead of ours. If it's, we think the future will be different from the past for reasons X, Y, and Z, what are those reasons? Our expert provided historical data and then recommended net salvage rates that are conservative relative to that data. We cited in footnote 51 of our statement of the issues that in one case, OCC had recommended a net salvage multiple of 2.75, and that multiple was found to be reasonable. For another major type of property, we had recommended a net salvage multiple of 2.69, and that was found to be excessive. So how could 2.75 be reasonable? Well, 2.69 is excessive based upon the same facts and record. I think these are just basic things that we would need to understand if there were to be a policy shift, but for all the reasons we've talked about before, we would advise against such a shift.
Thank you. And I don't mean to imply a policy shift, so I'm glad you raised that. I think this is really more about the facts in front of us and, and the witnesses, the expert witnesses' different approaches, and based on their reading of the data and the existing policies. So, yeah, I appreciate that.
If I could just make one
Yeah.
more remark, if that's
Sure.
okay. I was not the depreciation expert in the underlying case. I don't consider myself to be a depreciation expert. I've never done a study, but I did review as much of the record as I possibly could in the development of this statement of the issues. And one thing that was just tremendously unclear to me, and if we're going to lose depreciation, I understand we can't win them all, but I would love to understand how OCC adjusted our historical data. I read all of the testimony. I read the decision. There's one sentence that cites some evidence that it appears to be an erroneous citation. It doesn't seem to me that there was any explanation as to how the 5 years of net salvage expenditures in dollars that we incurred were adjusted to produce the net salvage accrual rates ultimately reflected in the decision. And that would just be something that's tremendously helpful to us in future cases if that's the direction that Pura wishes to go.
Thank you. And we'll hopefully hear from them later about that. Thank you.
Attorney Vaughn.
If there are no additional questions on depreciation, So in sum, those were the four main areas that I wanted to touch on. Obviously, the companies raised additional factors and considerations in their statement of issues with respect to certain O&M adjustments and with respect to the dim cap that I believe are appropriate and should be incorporated into the final revenue requirement. As I mentioned at the outset, I believe that Pura is tasked here with a difficult one, and I acknowledge that, and I appreciate you all being here and considering what the company's positions are. The companies have put forward in attachments 1 and 2 and in table, I believe table 1 of their statement of issues, if you'll bear with me, proposed revenue requirements for the future period that we believe strike an appropriate balance in order to right set the company's financial conditions and move beyond the issues that we've experienced in the past. And we appreciate your consideration of that. We believe that Pura can utilize the underlying record and any additional information it so deems necessary to craft those rates and craft orders that provide for the company's financial conditions to improve and to provide for just and reasonable rates. I know that that's the task, and I know that that's the task that we all have. And we would ask that you take our statement of issues and consider it, and we know that you will, and we appreciate that.
Thank you, Attorney Vaughn. And I believe I will turn to Office of Consumer Counsel.
Thank you, Commissioners. Andrew Minikowski for the Office of Consumer Counsel. In light of the authority's ruling earlier this morning, my notes have changed quite a bit, so just bear with me as I work through this. I just want to put into context the genesis of these cases. They didn't arise organically. They arose in response to a petition from numerous state entities and CIEC due to the fact that the companies were over-earning and that the actual rates they were charging no longer reflected appropriate costs. So at that point, Pura ordered the companies to come in. And I just want to set that stage as I move into the first topic that I would like to address, which is ROE. Prior to filing, the companies were repeatedly exceeding their authorized ROE. Their revenues were higher than necessary for the provision of service, including the cost of capital. Now, I'd like to point out, gas company returns are highly seasonal. They fluctuate depending on the weather, the usage, and the overall sort of climatic conditions that customers are facing. In this regard, I think it makes sense for Pura to look at running 12-month returns rather than just particular quarters in isolation when gauging whether the ROE that's set is appropriate. The company has proposed adopting a similar ROE to the one that the authority recently adopted in its reconsideration of Yankee Gas's rate case, and that came out to 9.48%. In part, the reason that came is because the authority removed several of the ROE reductions that Yankee had been facing and had requested that the authority reconsider. But I would like to point out that it's not an apt comparison. Yankee is a different company with a different financial situation. These rate cases were at two different points in time, and even the methodology that the authority applied in both of those cases was separate. If you look at the proxy groups that the authority evaluated in each case respectively, in Yankee, the authority looked at 8 different companies as parts of the proxy group. In CNG and SCG, the authority evaluated only 6. And of the overlap, only 5 of those companies were the same. So even the pool of comparison that was being used to set ROEs was not comparable between both cases. Attorney Vaughn mentioned the Hazardville rate case, which came out on Friday with an ROE set at 9.5. And I would like to raise, as the authority is aware, that also is not comparable because as a small water system, Hazardville's ROE is set specific to a formula. It doesn't go through the full ROE analysis that it does for the larger companies like CNG and SCG. So we would argue that the ROE that the PURA had set in the original decision, which came out to 9.20, subject to a 5 basis point reduction, that's within the range of acceptable ROEs, given the data that PURA had before it at the time and considered. And we believe that where PURA came out on that regard is reasonable. In regard to the 5 basis point penalty, which received much discussion during the company's remarks, this again was an issue that came from PURA. It was not one that OCC had raised in its briefing or advocacy. The authority in its discretion determined that it was reasonable to impose that penalty. However, it is related in large part to an issue that we did raise in our briefing in these cases and have raised with gas cases generally for all of the gas companies that are regulated. And this regards capital planning. You know, we've had some concerns in recent years with how the gas companies are conducting their capital investment planning. We raised this issue for the authority, specifically to CNG and SCG. The authority at that time did not adopt OCC's recommendations. However, in the Yankee case, which recently followed, the authority did address those issues directly. At page 45 of the final decision, which the authority recently issued in the Yankee gas reconsideration, the authority did discuss its concerns with the capital investment planning of Yankee. And these are very similar to the concerns we had raised in the underlying proceeding here. And we would recommend that the authority take a second look at those arguments that were contained in our original briefing and will likely be in our subsequent briefing to this argument. And in light of those concerns, we do believe that 5 basis point reduction was warranted, and it was in the authority's discretion. So to the extent the authority reviews that penalty again before it now, that is a discretionary function. And as we move towards eventually a PBR framework in the state, these are the sort of performance metrics that we will all be looking at. The companies, PURA, the OCC, you know, how are the companies planning their capital investment, and are those good investments? And this is sort of setting the stage for the way we're all going to start thinking as we move into that new paradigm in the coming years.
Yeah, if I may, can you comment on the why you're advocating for an ROE reduction as compared to a used and useful disallowance?
I think the authority could actually approach it either way. If it wanted to, it could go through every single service contract that, you know, was in that time period. I think what the decision, I mean, I can't speak for what the authority did, but my read of the original decisions was that the authority simply used the ROE reduction sort of as a general performance incentive rather than as a specific disallowance of those costs related to each project. However, I think if the authority had pursued that route, it would have been fully within its discretion to do so.
So tell me a little bit about how you think the ROE works as an incentive in this context.
I think in contexts like this, particularly for a relatively, in the scheme of things, small ROE reduction, it reminds the company that, hey, here's something we did that maybe wasn't necessarily wrong, but the authority felt it was not consistent with good, management of our companies. So if we fix this when we come in the future, the authority can remove this reduction and we can show improvement on X, Y, or Z, or whatever PURA improved it for. PURA has done this in recent years and in recent cases. And I think, regardless of the change in administration at PURA, I think it has been an effective tool. I think after an apt example is after Tropical Storm Isaias, there were some similar ROE reductions to improve storm performance. Not to remind any of us of those briefs. But I think that's a prime example, and PURA ultimately lifted some of those penalties in subsequent rate cases in a manner that I just described. Specifically UI, I believe, was the company where PURA lifted it and said, look, you made all these changes, you've definitely improved what we were concerned about. That shows what we wanted to see. And so I think, right now, before we have the full PBR framework in place, it is a tool in PURA's toolbox to incent a more responsive management by the company.
So in this case, it's more of a stick than a carrot.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, and the company certainly does have the incentive to to connect service and start reaping revenues from that newly connected customer. So that incentive is still there too, correct?
That's correct.
Thank you.
Another item that the OCC would like to focus on, and I'll just rip it off now and get it over with, is depreciation. I reviewed the company's statement of the issues on depreciation. It is extensive. Ultimately, what it comes down to is a battle of the experts. We had two vying experts before the authority, Mr. Alice for the companies and Mr. Dunkel for the OCC. And this is a battle that's played out many times, and the arbiter of that decision is ultimately PURA. They review the respective experts, their methodologies, and they determine which one they think makes sense for the companies. Now, CNG and SCG in their statement cited a number of other jurisdictions that have adopted a methodology that's similar to the one advocated by their expert. However, one jurisdiction that was notably absent is Connecticut. And Connecticut has consistently adopted a methodology similar to that, and in times identical to that, offered by Mr. Dunkel by the OCC in previous cases. If the authority were to shift course and adopt the company's proposed depreciation methodologies on remand here, that would be a significant change in policy towards depreciation from this regulatory body. Ultimately, the OCC's position is that we don't see any reason to depart from the authority's past practice of following a depreciation method that's similar to Mr. Dunkel's. We do not believe this creates intergenerational cost shifting, but rather protects the current ratepayers from paying too much. Ultimately, the company's methodology would require customers to pay for future costs of removal at inflated price levels. The authorized depreciation in the original final decisions in this matter covered by multiples, I think it was 3 times as much as the actual cost that the company was incurring in this regard. Ultimately, the depreciation ask in these cases was large. It was of a great magnitude. And I think PURA's final decision was not only consistent with the final decisions that have come before it for many years in the previous administration and the administrations before that. There was no departure from what the companies would have expected. They know that the authority has followed this methodology in the past. Of course, they're free to advocate for another one, and they did strenuously in this case. But the authority, that was a decision that was in the authority's discretion over which methodology made more sense in the case.
So, excuse me, so you would disagree with the characterization that Mr. Dunkel's recommendation, OCC's recommendation, is non-traditional?
I would certainly disagree with that. In Connecticut, absolutely. I mean, the authority has adopted Mr. Dunkel's recommendations in case after case after case. I mean, you can go back to when our office initially started retaining him years ago, and the authority has made depreciation findings in its rate cases that are consistent with that. Now, I recognize there are other states that have not adopted Mr. Dunkel's recommendations, but those are other states that have their own regulatory paradigms and issues that aren't necessarily comparable to Connecticut. But in terms of regulatory consistency and predictability, this body has traditionally adopted Mr. Dunkel's recommendations.
Just to clarify, so I know it had been a while, but in the last rate case for the company, did he make a recommendation that was accepted?
So the CNG's previous rate case settled very quickly, I think a month after it was filed. So we never got to the point of Mr. Dunkel making a recommendation in that case, although he was retained. In SCG's most recent rate case, I believe I'd also settled, I'm told. So again, same thing, the authority never made an actual finding because it adopted the settlement agreement that was there. However, for instance, to keep it within the Avangrid family, in the recent UI rate cases, Mr. Dunkel's methodology was adopted by the commission, as well as in Yankee and Aquarian and other recent rate cases that have come out of the commission.
So and when it was adopted in those cases, was it the same as he proposed here?
Very similar, yes. Thank you, Commissioner. Moving on. There are some other expenses that were raised in the statement of issues that the company filed, and I just wanted to highlight these, although they were not spoken to during oral argument today. One is the board of directors expense. The original final decision adopted again a breakdown of this expense that's consistent with authority precedent. Traditionally, the authority has gone with a 75-25 split, 75% attributable to shareholders and 25% attributable to ratepayers for the coverage of the board of directors expenses. This again is a consistent allocation of rate case principles that the authority has followed for a number of years. And in this particular case, we would see no reason to depart from that treatment. The actual rate case expense and consultant expense itself, this is interesting because this is the last case that came in under the old statute before 16243 GG changed, and those costs moving forward are no longer recoverable by the utility companies. However, and this builds off the point I just made to Commissioner Smith. The company cites an 800% figure in its statement of issues that the expenses were 800% greater. Well, of course they were, because the last two cases settled, relatively quickly in the process. There weren't experts drafting testimony and flying out here to testify in the hearing room and responding to interrogatories. So the costs, of course, were much lower. And again, the way the authority proceeded with this case originally was it conjoined CNG and SCG into one rate proceeding, which was a behemoth and very confusing to work through at times. So that itself also increased costs. The authority had disallowed 50% of that expense in the original case, and we would believe that's appropriate here. A final issue, and this falls, I believe, within the motion ruling this morning on new evidence, but again, the legal expense the company has proposed associated with the appeal. I recognize the company has incurred that expense, but that would be appropriate in a future rate proceeding. And we would argue that it's not even appropriate for ratepayers to bear that at all. The company had in that appeal 5 different attorneys from 3 different top-tier law firms before the court. Extensive discovery dragged that appeal out for more than a year. And ultimately, here we are again, incurring more costs to figure out what the rate should be for ratepayers. In the meantime, if a ratepayer were to ask us, what's going on with my rates? For the last 2 years, we would have had to say, it's uncertain. It's to be determined. This old plan is still in effect for now, but it could change. And that did not benefit ratepayers who look for certainty and predictability in their billing and their rates. One other issue I would like to speak to, and this is specific to SCG, is the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act amortization of that. The company points out that it received in the original SCG decision unique treatment compared to the other regulatory assets that were before the authority, and that is correct. The OCC agrees that it was treated differently in the authority's original decisions. All of the other assets were amortized outside of rate base with carrying costs. The original final decision treated this issue like all of the other ADITs and used the balance as an offset to rate base. OCC had supported this in its briefing and throughout the hearing. We think that modifying this amortization while it's ongoing would be inappropriate. It would disregard the rate year paradigm that we would follow. And so we believe the authority should keep the treatment of that particular tax amortization that it followed in the original decision. There are some other issues, and the company had noted in its statement of issues that it was conceding the other issues that it wasn't raising, that it was fine with how the authority treated them. But because some of these issues are issues that the OCC cared about a great deal, we would like to raise them now. The first is one the company did not concede, but this is the DIMP cap. In our view, the DIMP cap protects ratepayers. It allows a path to expedited recovery. The company is currently collecting under this mechanism, and it ensures that the company can continue to maintain its system and ensure against leaks and reliability issues while safeguarding customers from paying too much in a given time. And so we would support the authority keeping the DIMP cap in the new decisions as imposed in the original decisions. The other issues, cybersecurity.
Excuse me.
Of course.
Sorry.
Yes.
Attorney Minkowski, since you brought it up, the DIMP cap, the companies have identified safeguards right? In terms of accountability for their spending under the DIM. And you're arguing that those are insufficient to accept the company's proposal with regard to DIM.
Yeah, I think that's correct. The way the authority structured the DIMP cap in the original decisions, we think is a better outcome for ratepayers, and that it ensures that they aren't being charged more than necessary in these periods between rate cases.
Okay, thank you.
A few final issues where we are in agreement with the original decisions. One I would like to raise is cybersecurity. In the companies both incurred an amount of cybersecurity expense invested in their systems. In the original proposed final decisions, PURA had actually disallowed this recovery of that expense, and the OCC had argued that it actually should be allowed. In rates, we believe this is a very important area for all utility companies to invest in the coming years, both in terms of customer data security, but also the system itself, which is subject to potential cyber actors seeking to infiltrate that. So we would support, again, as we did in the original decisions, the authority authorizing recovery of cybersecurity expense. I think that's an expense that will only increase in coming years. So it's important now, as we've seen in global affairs recently, safeguarding the grid against malicious actors and safeguarding the gas system against those actors is extremely important, and there is a ratepayer benefit there. We'd also like to highlight the customer service orders that the authority had established in the original decisions. EOE did a fine job of reviewing many consumer calls and gauging what the level of customer service CNG and SCG customers were receiving, and was found deficient in a number of areas. And the authority had issued numerous corrective orders to improve the customer experience and improve customer service performance for both companies. And again, we would say that if the authorities to revisit those issues, those orders should be contained in the new decision as well, as there's a clear and direct consumer benefit in that regard. So unless the commissioners have any additional questions.
All right. Thank you, Attorney Minikowski.
Thank you all, and may the 4th be with you.
Thank you. We need all the 4th we can get. EOE, please, Attorney Lopez.
Good afternoon, commissioners. First, I'd like to say congratulations to Sobi on a well-earned retirement. If I may, so I don't want to take up too much time. There will be briefs, so we will obviously file our brief. And we filed our statement of issues. So if I could, just for a moment, state that one, ROE, right? Everyone's talked about ROE, so I'll talk about ROE as well. We, in the underlying proceeding, had an expert witness, Mr. Rothschild. We believe his cost of equity calculations should be considered by the authority. We believe his methods better align with market expectations overall. Ultimately, we believe that these investor expectations, not rates in other jurisdictions or ROEs issued in Hazardville water, are it's what was filed in the rate case, obviously. And there was a conversation about proxy groups. I will just note that Mr. Rothschild's proxy group was the same as the company's expert, Ms. Bulkley. So just if you're thinking about proxy groups and things of that nature, we'd like you to look at our experts as well. We also wanted to point out, and again, right, we also concede that there's been time since the filing of this rate case, right? And it's strange to be back in this situation from an appellate process that took quite a bit of time, and now we're looking at the underlying record again. So, but the record is what the record is. And so We reviewed the EOE in the underlying rate proceeding, reviewed the company's customer service, and we believe that their poor customer service warranted an ROE reduction. Now, it wasn't granted by the authority, but that being said, we believe that you may review the underlying record and the evidence that we believe that their customer service did warrant an ROE reduction. And there was a conversation, Commissioner Beecher, between you and Attorney Minikowski. That ROE reduction from EOE's perspective is, yes, it would be a stick to incentivize better behavior. But there was quite a bit of discussion in the underlying rate proceeding about how EOE didn't evaluate enough calls. Just for the record, right, we evaluated 220 calls, or excuse me, 250 calls for SCG and 220 calls for CNG. So I'm just saying both. And so all those calls that EOE evaluated were from 2023, right? They were from the underlying proceeding. And, you know, ultimately, we thought that the companies were consistently providing poor information to customers. So that is just something that we would like to continue to note. Obviously, we'll bring it up in our brief again, but we believed that the customer service warranted some level of ROE penalty for the company.
Attorney Lopez.
Yes, yes.
So what's the process that goes through to evaluate customer calls and interaction with the company?
Right. So ultimately, right, we would assign to staff, right? So we would review, right? We asked for calls in the record. We would look at authorities' decisions and precedent. Ultimately, that was set prior. Affordability rubrics, if you will, based on past precedent, and then we would evaluate those calls to make sure that the information that the authority would have required was either present in the call or not present in the call. So that's a very broad overview, but this is a very time-consuming process, right? Because these calls can last 20 minutes, 30 minutes, 40 minutes, right? Recorded calls, and we're evaluating those calls, and we're internally scoring those calls and then making our recommendation in our brief. So we will highlight all of that again, but that is the general process that we would follow.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. And then sorry, bear with me for just a moment. We had quite a bit. I just wanted to note a couple things. We didn't. We recommend adoption of a low-income discount rate as well. However, with usage caps, we'll talk about more about that in our brief. But that's just something to be aware of. Other things. And while we do think that the authority got it right, ultimately in the final decision, we just want to note the earnings sharing mechanism. And we will be bringing that up again so that anything that over earnings on ROE are appropriately shared with the customer and then not inappropriately just adjusted. So again, we think that the final decision was right on this, but we will again, because the final decision is gone. And so that's kind of the other point is we're looking at this anew. I encourage you to look at this anew. While there may be great things from the final decision, not so great things from the final decision, what matters here is the underlying record. And so we're just trying to draw you back to the underlying record to review that and make your own determinations. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you have, sorry.
Attorney Lopez,
Apologies.
thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Beecher.
Yeah, so backtracking a little bit to ROE.
Sure.
There was in the company statement, they suggest that 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 we should be considering peer utilities in the state of Connecticut in determining the ROE. So when I think about the proxy group, should it be constrained? What would be the basis in either utility finance or regulatory practice to constrain the proxy group to Connecticut or to broaden it?
Well, the proxy group doesn't have to be constrained to Connecticut, and I don't, from the underlying rate proceeding, I will have to, if you bear with me, I don't recall our underlying, Mr. Rothschild's underlying proxy group. However, I do know that it was the same as Ms. Bulkley's, which was the company's expert on proxy group, and I don't, and I could be mistaken, but I'm 99% certain that the proxy group were not made up of Connecticut companies alone.
Yeah, thank you. Because, and this is something the company can address in there when they come back, but I believe there was something in there about receiving authorized ROEs commensurate with peer utilities in the state. So you would disagree with that?
Sorry, would you repeat that
I'm
question?
sorry, that the ROE should be set commensurate with peer utilities in the state.
Pure utilities in the state?
Commensurate with peer, sorry,
Peer
peer
utilities.
utilities.
So, I don't know if I would reject that out of hand. That being said, the ROE should be set commensurate with the evidence that's in the record, right? And so, it may be a piece that the authority could consider, certainly. One, I'd suggest that, right, the authorized ROE for Yankee Gas is obviously not evidence that's in this underlying record, or same with Hazardville. And so, while it may feel strange, right, I'd ask that the commission focus on what's in the underlying record, what the experts have suggested, and look to, if we're looking at proxy groups, the proxy groups that were developed by, I think the OCC's expert was Mr. Woolridge, the company's expert, Ms. Bulkley, and our expert, Mr. Rothschild. So you can consider all of those things appropriately, but I don't think looking at just pure utilities in the state is how you should be setting your ROE.
Thank you. So the authority has the ability to consider the facts and circumstances of the particular utility company in front of us and the evidence that we think best informs our assessment of commensurate risk and return.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. No further questions from the commissioners. Thank you, Attorney Lopez.
Thank you.
Attorney McCormick?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. I'd also like to congratulate Toby on his well-earned retirement. So today I'd like to take a moment to highlight a couple points we argued in our original briefs in the underlying docket 23-1102 and that we flagged in our statement of the issues. First, I would like to address depreciation. We echo the OCC's points on this. The OCC's expert witness, Mr. Dunkel, provided a reasonable depreciation calculation in contrast to the company's proposal that overstated future net salvage costs. The net salvage rates calculated by Mr. Dunkel took into account the large discrepancy between the company's recent actual incurred net salvage costs and the company's proposed net salvage recovery, as well as provided adequate funds to increase the reserve and insulate future ratepayers from unfair rate increases. Next, turning to operations and maintenance expenses, I would like to speak to the Board of Director expenses. In the authority's original final decision, the authority disallowed all Board of Director expenses that are required to be disallowed by Connecticut General Statute 16-243 GG and disallowed 75% of Board of Director expenses from the remaining costs in that original 23-1102 case. We submit that the authority should disallow all the expenses that fall within Connecticut General Statute 16-243 GG and disallow at least 75% of the Board of Director expenses as it did in the original docket. The authority has previously determined that the Board of Director expenses, that the board of directors rather acts primarily to benefit the company's shareholders, and thus those shareholders should bear most of the costs.
Attorney McCormick, I believe
Yes.
Commissioner Smith has a question, if I can
Sorry,
interrupt you
just while you're on the
briefly.
topic, did someone prior to you say that the statute that you're talking about, for the state of Connecticut disallowing those expenses occurred after the case in question? Sorry? Oh, it was rate case expenses, not board of directors. Okay.
My apologies. It was a certain portion of, so Connecticut General Statutes 243 GG. It prohibits recovery through rates of any direct or indirect costs associated with travel, lodging, or food and beverage expenses for any company's board of directors and officers, or the board of directors and officers of such company's parent company. And so that was the section that the authority originally disallowed as part of the rate case expense. There's also that 75, once that portion of the board of director expense was disallowed, then there was 75% of the remaining costs that were disallowed. And the Attorney General submits that the same calculation that the authority applied should apply in this case as well. Thank you. We thank the authority for the opportunity to present oral argument, and thank the authority and its staff for all the work on it's completed on this docket prior the 23-1102 as well as these current dockets.
Thank you, Attorney McCormick. I'll ask a quick follow-up, and this may be, again, something that the company can respond to since the board expenses came up. Do boards of directors focus on the interests of current shareholders or future shareholders?
I'm not sure if I understand.
Is it,
the question.
so in boardrooms, 'cause I've never been in one, are they talking about how to protect the interests of their current investors or shareholders at their primary focus, or to what extent do you think they consider, and this is just purely hypothetical, so you really don't even have to answer, but like, because it's sort of implied that they're thinking about it, maintaining their attractiveness to future investors. But I guess, I mean, that raises a really interesting finance question about what their orientation is. And I mean, would you suggest that as to support your position that, what is their main focus? What do you think those boards are focused on?
Commissioner, I think that would probably be better addressed in writing in our briefs that we're going to be submitting next week.
Sure thing. I mean, it's just an interesting question because, to what extent the boards, look to the interests of future investors, or do financial markets do that, right? Because efficient financial markets will address the needs of future investors. So, I mean, I realize that these are intricate, relationships, but I just think when we're talking about what costs should ratepayers support, I think it's a valid question. And maybe the answer, is might be nuanced, but there's a real valid question as to whether ratepayers should support board activity in either scenario, right? It was just sort of implied in the statement that the board is concerned about future investors, and I thought that was an interesting thread to explore. So I just throw it out there for everybody to think about.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Thank you, Attorney McCormick. Attorney Vaughn, is there anything to which you would like to respond?
Thank you. Going back over what was said, I'll highlight a key points. I don't think I'll go for nearly as long as I did on the outset, but appreciate you bearing with me. I believe Attorney Minikowski referenced the context under which these cases were filed, and I do believe that context is important here. One company, CNG, was over-earning at the end of 22 by $8 million. Half of that it shared with customers, so there was $4 million of over-earnings 3.5 years ago. The companies were asked to come in or ordered to come in
by a date certain and did so. And then the resultant rates did not reflect the results of that over earnings. It was a drastically and markedly increased reduction vis-a-vis the one prior period of over earnings for that one company. So I do think that that's important to take into context. With respect to OCC, with respect to the OCC's statements earlier, I believe Attorney Minikowski stated that we were conceding certain issues. And I do believe that, I just want to clarify that for a moment. We have presented a revenue requirement that accepts many of the downward adjustments that we disagree with. And we have also proposed our, resolution vis-a-vis the disputed items that results in the revenue requirements proposed in Table 1 and outlined in attachments 1 and 2. I don't think that those can be taken in isolation of one another by the companies, right? So we are saying that, in an effort to move forward for future rates, we would accept many downward adjustments if these issues were corrected and we end up with just and reasonable rates. But that should not be taken as oh, well, you concede to the various adjustments that were made in, herein, and then we're going to, tweak everything else. I wouldn't view that necessarily as a concession. So I just wanted to say that clearly. On depreciation, I believe I heard Attorney Minikowski speak about depreciation. I did not hear him explain how the OCC adjusted the company's historical experience to arrive at their recommendations. And you can review the underlying record for that, but Mr. Hurwitz flagged that as an issue, and I'd like to raise it again. Mr. Alice's testimony with respect to the various jurisdictions and where those, what about Connecticut? Mr. Alice's rebuttal testimony has several pages of discussion on historical context in Connecticut that I think Pura could examine and take into consideration. And on the SCG tax issues that Mr. Minikowski raised, I would just clarify that does not represent AIDIT. And the logic for not including that, for excluding that or treating that regulatory liability as the other assets and liabilities holds true. It makes no sense, candidly, why this one was treated differently from the others, that it happened to be the largest one and it happened to be for the benefit of customers. So I just think that has to be resolved by this commission. With respect to the ROE, which several entities raised, the constitutional standard states that a just and reasonable rate of return on equity should be comparable to returns investors expect to earn on other investments of similar risk, sufficient to assure confidence in the company's financial integrity, and adequate to maintain and support the company's credit and to attract capital. That's cited in our case, in our statement of issues from Hope and Bluefield. It's kind of the well-cited constitutional standard, which is embodied in 1619E. We know that we have the benefit of knowing that didn't happen in this case, because after it came out, the companies were downgraded, their access to capital was impaired. They've not been able to earn that ROE because of the downward adjustments and the cuts that were made to their proposals. So when we highlight for you the 9.48 ROE that was used for illustrative purposes in attachments 1 and 2, we do think that's an important benchmark. Now, the ROE ranges that Pura cited in this case were between 8.5 and 10. Right, that comes from the underlying record, and the ranges were quite similar. And so we're putting that out there as again a reasonable benchmark, given the passage of time and where the companies are. That, you know, all of these companies face similar risks. These are operating as, you know, gas utilities in the state of Connecticut. We do think that that's reasonable. I'm not suggesting that every utility needs to have the same exact ROE, but I do think that you do need to benchmark against yourselves almost. And I think that, especially in keeping with the constitutional standard of comparable returns that investors would expect.
Can I follow up a little bit, Attorney Vaughn? So in the company's history, have they ever had trouble raising capital?
Yes, we have.
And how is that manifest?
That manifested, and I see Mr. Hurwitz coming up, but if in following the 2022 UI rate case, and Mr. Hurwitz can correct me if I go astray or Ms. Van Luling, following the 2022 UI rate case, CNG and SCG went to market to price debt, and they were unable to do so at appropriate rates. And eventually it was filled, but I'll have Ms. Van Luling come up to give the history, but there was a very serious impact following the 2022 UI rate case that was experienced by these gas utilities. And also by UI, that led to an interim rate increase request, which was denied by UI, but there have been very real and recent instances of following rate case decisions an impact to our access to capital.
And before we proceed, is this in the record
I believe so.
of this
Yeah.
case?
Yes, this occurred. It should be. Yeah, I'll check that, but it did occur, and we can talk about it.
Just to expand on what Attorney Vaughn said, we went out to issue debt for CNG and SCG. We had no bidders. And the only reason that we were able to get bidders is because we were in the market for some of the other sister companies under the Avangrid umbrella. And that is the only reason that we were able to raise capital that day. And I do believe that the instances of this are outlined in the policy panel testimony. We can confirm that for you.
Yeah, but you have a parent company, right?
CNG and SCG have a parent company. This was in regards to debt, though, debt issuances.
At the
Yes.
subsidiary level?
Yes,
Yeah.
at the subsidiary level.
So
So the parent company can only provide capital contributions. We have to get debt from external sources.
and when you issue debt, that debt then gets folded into your total capital structure at some new rate. It doesn't, for just that portion, it doesn't take over the whole cost of debt. Is that correct?
That's correct, but depending on how much certain debt expires or it comes up and it's due to be reissued, so you have to pay it off and then you reissue it again. So depending on how much it is, that rate is at that portion of the debt. So if we had in a hypothetical situation, $500 million of debt and we were 150 million was coming due and we needed to reissue 150 million, 150 million would be at those higher rates.
Right. Attorney Vaughn referred to an appropriate rate. Did that constrain were you seeking debt at a certain rate, or, I mean?
When you have a debt issuance, you go out looking for the market rates at that time. And then there's like spreads on those market rates depending on how risky you are, what your debt rating is, or your creditworthiness, et cetera, et cetera. And the rate that we did end up getting was substantially higher interest rate than what we had in the revenue requirement at the time. And it was higher than what the market going rate was due to there was no interest in funding the debt.
So the market supplied the capital.
The market supplied the cash, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
sorry. I'm sorry, yeah. But just not at the rate you would have liked under your rate structure.
Correct. And the market made it clear that they were only supplying the cash because we had other issuances out for sister companies at that time. Had we been just, I believe it was CNG at that time, the market would not have funded it.
Okay. Does it sometimes go the other way, that you've got something built into debt, you've got a debt cost, a capital structure built into rates, you go to the market, something really great happens, or you can go to the DOE and get a loan if you're an energy company? In other words, like, sometimes, like it can cut both ways, right? This whole issue of regulatory lag, stuff that happens, including debt issuances, could cut the other way.
So the rate case will set whatever your interest rate is, and that's what's in theory collected through the revenue requirement. In theory, if you were in a decreasing interest rate environment and you issued debt subsequently 6 months later and the interest rates were lower, yes, you could end up in a situation where the revenue that you're collecting for interest rates is higher than what your actual interest rate expense is. However, we've been seeing an increase in interest rates as you know, over the past 5-6 years, and that has not occurred to date.
Okay, so to the extent that the cost of debt or anything else, any other cost of service changes after a rate increase, to the extent that the company evaluates that it impairs their ability to actually earn their allowed return, to the extent that that happens, their remedy is to come back here to seek a change in rates, correct?
Yeah, the only remedy is if there is a change in the actual interest rates against what's in the revenue requirement, is to file a new rate case seeking the change in the interest rate expense allowance within the revenue requirement.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, one more question. So, I think you made a statement along the lines of the market. Had your affiliates not been doing debt issuances, the market would have not given you capital. So first question is, who is the market in that statement? Is that the bank or is that the public bond market?
It's the various different banks. So like Bank of America, JP Morgan, Chase.
So it's one-on-one conversations with the lenders.
It's not one-on-one conversations necessarily with the lenders, but you go out and then the various different banks will bid on the amounts that you're looking to issue debt for.
Okay, so because it surprises me, because it seems to me that we wouldn't be talking about a situation here, given your rating, even the ratings I'm not allowed to think about. It would be not your ability to get the capital, it would be the cost of that capital. And the way to evaluate it would be, what was your cost relative to other utilities with similar credit ratings? And is there a way to somehow quantify the cost of your debt relative to other utilities with similar credit ratings at the time?
Yes, there is, and I think we may have done that on the.
And before we go any further, can you just make sure you confirm where in the record all this information is located for us, please?
That's OCC 37 and our written exceptions at 62 describe just what Commissioner Smith, you were questioning. We had originally issued or tried to issue this debt at the.
Sorry, can you get closer to the microphone? Here justice isn't blinded, but it's deaf.
So I'll just repeat, that's OCC 37 and our written exceptions at 62. This is the SCG reference. I imagine there's a similar one for CNG that I didn't pull up so quickly. But this describes just what you were questioning, Commissioner Smith, that we had initially attempted to issue the debt at the rate you would expect for our credit ratings. Then we had to offer a more attractive rate to attract that debt, and it quantifies it at 10 to 15 basis points.
So this is in fact in the existing record?
Pulled
In
up
those, with those sites that you gave us?
I've just pulled up our
All
written
right.
exceptions from docket number 231102.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. With respect to and I'll just jump back into it, moving beyond the ROE point for now. With respect to the customer service, I don't believe that any penalty was warranted in the underlying case. None was approved, and none would be warranted here. The company's demonstrated in the underlying case proactive, sustained improvement in customer service quality across vendor performance. This case happened at a relatively
transitory time for UI's or CNG's and SCG's customer service vendor. They were, at the time of the initial filing, they were working with a legacy vendor to try to improve their performance and actively managing them. And then during the travel of that case, they transitioned to provide certain calls, energy affordability calls to a new vendor. That vendor, Alorica, is also handling energy affordability calls for UI under that shared management function of the customer service team. In none of those cases is a customer service penalty warranted, and in each of them did the company provide evidence that they have strong management practices over their vendors. It's also important to keep in mind the scale of calls. I think the focus on this in this case was energy affordability, but the companies receive between 750 and 950,000 calls a year, and so it's a very small slice of the pie, and I don't believe that any of it supports a customer service penalty. The companies have well-documented concerns and challenges with, EOE's claims on customer service, and I'm not going to rehash those here. We can do that in writing if it is deemed an issue in the case. But I did just want to make the point that the underlying case does not support a customer service ROE penalty. And then with respect to the board of directors issue, since that came up, I don't believe that the past use of a 75-25 split is indicative of an appropriate rate making treatment. I understand that splitting has been done in the past, but I believe under the one of the recent Aquarian decisions, the court has said that Pura needs to articulate the basis for that division. And I think that the companies has demonstrated that they need to have boards of directors under the settlement agreements that formed Avangrid, that they need to have a board of directors, that they need to compensate those directors. And that is what is included here. The board, the money that we are asking for does not include the excluded food and lodging and those things that are excluded by statute. We're strictly speaking about the allocated compensation amounts for those directors. The board, it's a bit of a false a false clashing between the board and customers, right? The board takes both a short and long-term view of value, I would say, and it's looking to operate the company as a going concern. The company provides gas service to customers, and so that includes approving investments and other matters that allow the company to continue to provide those safe and reliable services to customers. So I don't believe that the 75-25 split has been articulated consistent with the Aquarian decision as we outlined in our statement of the case, and we believe that those costs should be recovered. Similarly, rate case expense. I think our statement of Mr. Minikowski raised that as an issue and said that the 800% reflects the settlement agreement that occurred in the last case. But that we documented in this case that there was a greatly increased and complex environment for rate cases, and we did support the underlying rate case expense. As Mr. Minikowski noted, these cases were filed at a time when these cases preceded the effective date of any sort of statutory bar on rate case expense, and they should be recoverable from customers. And any further questions? Thank you.
Right. Thank you, Attorney Vaughn. All right. Are there any other procedural or administrative matters that we need to address? All right. Well, I'm going to conclude this with regard to 25-11-13. Thank everyone for participating today. Briefs are due by 4 p.m. on May 15th, 2026. And I'd like to remind parties that any briefs you submitted in 23-1102 are not part of this record in the instant docket, and you may refile those briefs in the instant docket if you so choose. And I'm adjourning this, Attorney Vaughn.
Just for clarity, and maybe you were getting there, I believe at the beginning of the day, we mentioned that this was for I think you introduced this as for 25-1113.
Correct.
Okay, and will we be reinstituting?
We're doing 25-1114. I'm closing this one
Okay.
and reopening another one. And I will query you before I officially open this. And maybe I should officially open it and then query you. All right. Yes, all right. So we have adjourned our statement of the case hearing for 25-1113. Good afternoon. Welcome to docket 25-1114, the remand of the application of Southern Connecticut Gas Company to amend its rate schedule. We're here today to hear argument from the parties and interveners. I'm sure you're well aware of the background. I don't believe there are any additional appearances. Now, with regard to administrative matters, and I will entertain from the parties whether they would like to adopt the arguments they presented, the arguments and answers they presented in the preceding oral arguments, or whether you would like to conduct this again. And I will allow the company, the applicant, to weigh in and then take answers from the parties and interveners.
Thank you, and apologies for getting ahead of myself a few minutes ago. Subject to the other parties and interveners adopting their similar arguments, we would do the same.
Okay, Office of Consumer Counsel, Attorney Minikowski.
Well, the first docket was just the dress rehearsal, so I wanted to do no, in all seriousness, the OCC would adopt all of its comments and argument from the previous proceeding. I did just want to clarify, because I forgot what we were doing. I had raised an issue that was specific to SCG in the CNG docket related to the tax liability. So I would just like to clarify for the record that specific issue.
I believe the first docket was SCG.
Was it?
Yes.
I still don't know what's happening.
So you
Right, so
think
never
you were
mind.
good.
All right, I'm good. Nothing
Right.
further. Thank you, commissioners.
Thank you. Attorney Lopez.
Yes, we adopt our arguments and statements.
Attorney
for both.
McCormick.
We adopt our arguments and comments as well. Thank
All
you.
right. Do I need you officially to come back up and stipulate to that, or do we, I think I will tick all the boxes then.
Thank you. Yes, subject to those adoptions, we are all set. We adopt our primary
right.
statements.
Attorney Minkowski, again, to just formally stipulate to that, and we can, I just want to see you jump up and down. That's
all
some more exercise.
It works. Yes, the OCC would stipulate to that.
All right.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Attorney Lopez?
Yes, we stipulate.
All right. Attorney McCormick? All right. So again, as a reminder, any further procedural administrative matters? No. Thank you for participating in today's arguments. I really appreciate everybody being here and weighing in on this. Obviously, this is something that this new panel looks forward with eager anticipation to contemplating. I want to thank you all for weighing in on this. Reminder, briefs are due by 4 p.m. on May 15, 2026. And again, as I said before, any briefs you submitted in 23-1102 are not part of this record and should be included. And with that, again, thank you very much. Thank you, Sobi. And we are adjourned.